The Fate of Austria. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 726. The master is not here. The Caramanli family returned to Tripoli with thousands of Egyptian craftsmen given by Franz. The first thing they did when they came to power was to announce that they would sever all ties with the United States. The former Caramanli family, led by its most outstanding leader Yusuf Caramanli, tamed the Tuareg tribes in the west, defeated the Bedouin in the east, and even conquered the desert tribes in the south. With the ministry under his command, the territory he ruled was no different from Libya at that time. Yusuf Caramanli built schools, opened handicraft workshops, and learned advanced technology from the West. At the same time, he took advantage of the European war period to wrestle materials, to actively develop business and build his own merchant fleet. While the Kingdom of Tripoli was prospering, the Americans discovered that war money was indeed easy to make. The Americans easily achieved the achievement of doubling their territory during the Napoleonic Wars. I won't go into more detail so as not to talk about hydrology. In short, by coincidence, Tripoli was targeted by the Americans. Washington directly appointed William Eaton, the US consul in Tunisia, as commander of the naval fleet, and decided to provide some small help to the Berbers in Africa. For example, overthrow the Tripoli government and establish a pro-American regime. Soon they found an unlucky guy. This was Yusuf Pasha's brother. With the US military occupying the port of Derna, the civil war in Tripoli officially began. However, the US military was really good at that time. In the battle with the African indigenous people, they found that they were the one who suffered the greater losses. It took 1.5 US soldiers to kill one Tripoli indigenous person. In the end, Washington had to pay reparations and withdraw its troops amid domestic condemnation. However, the civil war interrupted Tripoli's development, and it was eventually taken over and re-established as a direct jurisdiction of the Ottoman Empire. Fortunately, the Ottoman Pasha who followed was equally unworthy. Coupled with the further shift of the commercial center to the Atlantic and the impact of the Turkish-Egyptian War, Tripoli soon became a place where birds did not shit. Then, by acting as spies for Franz, the Caramanli family obtained a group of armed Egyptian craftsmen. Under the escort of Austria's armed merchant ships, they took back their homeland with almost no bloodshed. The biggest industry in Tripoli now is actually the port, which mainly relies on foreign merchant ships to come here to make extra money. Of course, it also provides some special services secretly, such as buying and selling slaves. In addition, there are olive oil, wool, and various handicrafts. However, the prices of these items are very low, but it is enough for the Caramanli family who is entrenched here. It is enough for them to support an army that can control the entire coastal area of Tripoli. The entire family also keeps a secret, which is a pit hundreds of meters deep. Almost no one knows what this pit is used for, but since the Caramanli family regained power, they have been recruiting civilians to dig the pit. Since there was no reasonable explanation, and people often died in the pit and could not return home, rumors spread over time that there was a monster in the pit. In fact, they were looking for oil, which was naturally what Franz asked for, because Austria didn't really need a desert. Oil is the blood of future industry, and Galicia's oil alone cannot afford the entire Austrian Empire. What's more, Franz has to take care of his allies in the German Confederation, so North African oil is necessary. At this time, the Caramanli family and the first few thousand Egyptian craftsmen actually constituted the ruling class in Tripoli at this time. Although it had only been a few years since the country was restored, the internal conflicts in Tripoli were more serious than Franz thought. The entire country was like a boiling water pot that could explode at any time. The Caramanli family didn't take it seriously about the Chechen envoys visiting at this time. After all, they were just puppets used by Franz to pull strings. They couldn't do anything without speaking from above. And the Chechens really don't know how to show appreciation. The Austrian side has clearly sent out so many gifts, but the former does not know how to return gifts. Previously, the special envoy responsible for contacting him was killed. Although it was an envoy from Austria, he was a member of the Caramanli family. Although some people wanted revenge, they were just puppets after all. If Franz, their benefactor, didn't say anything, they could only let it go. Unable to fall out with the Chechens, and not wanting to upset the owner, the Caramanli family casually sent a housekeeper to handle the matter. The purpose is to eat well and drink well, and don't know anything about it. Abidi Zabal was the steward of the Caramanli family who was responsible for the contact this time. He did not even want to allow the envoys of the Imam Khanate to enter the city. In a courtyard near the port of Tripoli, Abidi Zabal arrived belatedly. Although he kept saying sorry and his face was full of guilt, he kept silent about the assistance. Ibrahim did not want to waste time with the lackeys of the Caramanli family in front of him. I just want to ask, will you send troops? I'm just a little housekeeper. You have to ask Mr. Hezhan about this matter. Where is that Hezhan? I'm the servant of the great Imam Shamal. I represent the Imam Khanate. I want to talk to him. Ibrahim's tone was very exciting, and he couldn't taste the delicious food, no matter how good it was. As for wine, it was contraband in their teachings. Looking at the group of blasphemous guys in front of them, they felt even more angry, and their tone could not help but contain a hint of murderous intent. Abidi Zabal didn't react at all, but Ibrahim's men all put down their hands to eat and slid their hands to their waists. Yes, you can talk to Master Hezhan in person. After hearing Abidi Zabal's words, the atmosphere in the court suddenly relaxed a lot. Then, please take me there. Ibrahim's tone became much gentler. Abidi waved his hand. Don't worry. How can we not be in a hurry? Hundreds of thousands of Russian troops are raging in our homeland. They kill people and burn houses when they see them. Those who can't escape in time are either hanged or become slaves. Ibrahim said excitedly because he saw Chechens in Istanbul's slave square. Before coming. Ibrahim pulled the slave dealer to the corner and beat him up. He learned that these Caucasian slaves were sold to them by the Russians. It is obvious that the Russians are serious this time and want to completely drive them out. At this time Abidi continued, but Master Hezhan is not in Tripoli. Then, where is he? Ibrahim asked, grabbing Abidi's distache. Distache equals Arabian robe. Release, Abidi said coldly, but Ibrahim had no intention of letting go. Instead, he directly lifted the former up with his arms. Tell me, there are many strong men in North Africa. Abidi did not take the reckless man in front of him seriously, and this was his territory. There was no chance that a group of mountain bandits would become arrogant and domineering here. Chapter 727 The Devil in the Pit. On the side, the soldiers of the Caramanli family stepped forward with rum spears, but they were immediately counter-attacked by Ibrahim's men. In the flash of lightning, 5 against 8, but 4 of the latter fell, and the remaining 4 were firmly controlled. Although Abidi was surprised, he still didn't let go. He just felt a bit of fear looking at the bloodshot eyes in front of him. Like hungry wolves, Abidi felt that the other person did not dare to kill him, but Ibrahim's hand continued to tighten until the former's face turned red due to difficulty in breathing. Ahem. Mr. Hezhan went to Austria for business and won't be back until next month. Abidi felt the hands holding his throat loosen, but before he could be happy, he was lifted up by a strange force. Abidi felt that the world was upside down, and he fell rapidly. Croak. A sound. Ibrahim directly poured the Caramanli family's butler to the ground. The latter's neck was twisted in a strange way and he looked like he would not survive. The remaining Caramanli family soldiers were wiped out by scimitars before they could scream. The musicians and dancers who were too scared to move just now screamed and wanted to escape, but the elites of the Imam Khanate did not give them a chance. Soon the final carpet was soaked with blood, and Ibrahim spread out a map, send a signal and ask the brothers who remain on the ship to prepare for the attack. We will take advantage of the chaos and go directly to the palace. As long as we control the head of the Caramanli family, we can control this city. They have become corrupt and have become lackeys of the Europeans. We want to take everything from them. Long live Shami. Long live the Imam Khanate. Long live Shamal. Long live the Imam Khanate. Ibrahim only brought more than 300 people this time. In theory, it is impossible for such a small number of people to occupy the largest city in Tripoli. A week later, Franz looked helplessly at the crying man in front of him. Yes, this man is Hassan Karamanli, the actual ruler of Tripoli. It is hard to imagine that a city with more than 20,000 people was conquered by 300 people, and his uncle became a puppet king, Archduke. Franz, your most loyal servant Hassan is asking for your help. We have found the location of the black oil, and those devils must have come here for this. Ah. You trying to say that you suffered this disaster because you were doing things for me? Franz didn't like this statement very much, and he didn't like being kidnapped morally. And he knew very well that the great powers had not realized the importance of oil, and it was even less likely that the Chechens, who lived in a corner, knew about it. At the same time, Franz has grown up and there is no need for him to act harmless. Hassan Karamanli swallowed. He traveled between the Austrian Empire and Tripoli all the time. He was very aware of the gap between the two and quickly changed his words. No, Archduke Franz, I mean those devils may try to rob the wealth in the pit. If anyone wants it, you can get it. I don't care if you leave a few more barrels. Franz didn't like this kind of temptation at all. If he couldn't find a substitute, he wouldn't want to keep anyone, including the Karamanli family itself. But let's replace this guy who can't manage his own family well, and is too careful. Franz was not afraid, but he felt there was no need to waste energy and cause trouble for himself. Franz's words made Hassan Karamanli's heart sink. He thought that the other party did not know that he secretly stored oil. It seems that there should be an informant from the Austrian Empire around me, so I should clean up after going back. Hassan Karamanli thought to himself. After some bargaining, Hassan Karamanli will pay 3 million Ottoman liras and 5 years of olive oil exclusive privileges as a reward for hiring umbrella mercenaries. The Ottoman lira was a very unstable currency, with an exchange rate of almost 30 to 1 with a British pound. However, it rapidly depreciated under Mejid's reforms, and by this time, had depreciated to 40 to 1. 3 million Ottoman lira is almost £75,000. For this amount of money, Franz would have to dispatch at least 2,000 mercenaries and a dozen ships at the same time, because of the possibility of attacking the city. The mercenaries also brought 20 cannons. However, the battle went much smoother than expected, and the dock was captured with almost no effort. After that, the puppet army of the new king did not resist much. At first, they hid behind the city wall and dared to shout. However, after 2 volleys of artillery fire, the city walls made of sand, soil, bricks, and stones collapsed, and the morale of the defenders completely collapsed. The city garrison of more than 2,000 people surrendered without any suspense. Hassan Karamanli felt that his money was not worth the money. In front of the royal palace in Tripoli, Hassan Karamanli looked at the cannon in front of him and the neat mercenaries behind him. He suddenly felt that it was time to show off his kingly style. So the nominal Pasha of Tripoli, the de facto king, walked to the palace gate. People inside, listen, I'm Hassan Karamanli, Pasha of Tripoli, king. I order you to surrender immediately, otherwise I will not forgive your sins, and God will also treat you. Hearing a burst of gunfire, Hassan Karamanli stared in disbelief at the white robe that was seeping blood from his chest with his eyes wide open. He pointed his hand in front of the void and fell on his back. Pasha has been shot. Fight back. Fire. Several artillery pieces have already been loaded, and the ignition rod is fastened to the fuse. The sound of artillery fire immediately covered up the noise of human voices. Ibrahim inside was blown to pieces before he could be happy. At this time, Franz's mercenaries had already installed new high explosive bombs, and the huge noise just now shattered the former. However, Ibrahim was a veteran who had experienced several years of guerrilla warfare. He immediately ordered his men to fight back, hoping that the gunner who had just performed the miracle would continue to perform miracles and kill all the gunners outside. However, the miracle never happened. Until the end of the battle, no soldier could hit the gunners hundreds of meters away. The battle ended in an overwhelming victory, and both the false king Said Karamanli and Ibrahim were captured. The former claimed to have been coerced, but his explanation was too weak. So the Karamanli family and the local people sent him to the guillotine, and the latter was sentenced to death by stoning for his heinous crimes. The false king is dead. But Hassan Karamanli, the head of the Karamanli family, was also shot by the rebels and died of serious injuries at this time. In order to quickly stabilize people's hearts, Hamd Karamanli, who had been responsible for liaison with the Austrian Empire, could only be elected as the king. Hamd Karamanli has become a spiritual Austrian due to his long-term exposure to Austrian culture. In the foreseeable future, Tripoli will become more pro-Austrian and even Austrian. The Austrian mercenaries did not stay long. They quickly left the country by boat. However, some soldiers' guns looked a little strange and seemed to have some telescopes installed on them. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 728, Mobilization before the war. Free City of Krakow. The ancient buildings with strong styles, sharp edges and complicated decorations echo the modern Baroque factories. When the bell rings in the early morning, workers are herded into the factory like cattle and sheep. Corresponding to this is the bustling trading market. As the largest commercial center in the original Polish region, its influence did not decrease, but increased after the demise of the Kingdom of Poland. Especially after the completion of the railway, trade with the Austrian Empire became closer. The Free City of Krakow is located at the junction of Russia, Prussia, and Austria. This status has allowed Krakow's businessmen and politicians to gain a lot of benefits overtly and covertly. Therefore, most people are scornful and indifferent to the Polish spirit and the importance of national restoration promoted by some people. At this time, a very bumpy train was filled with people and luggage, just like a populous country in South Asia in later generations. Although the Free City of Krakow is already a busy commercial center, it should not be so busy. As soon as autumn arrived, the price of new grains was low, and merchants began to hoard grains. There is nothing wrong with buying low and selling high, but in the second-class carriage, a man wearing a windbreaker and a low-brimmed hat was reading a copy of the Pace newspaper he had just bought. Although the content of this newspaper was already a month ago, it still made the man clenched his fists, muttered something in his mouth, and laughed loudly, causing the passengers opposite him to frown. Fredrunov was a coal merchant, and honestly he had never seen anything like this. This is not to say that the steel mills in the Austrian Empire do not want coal, but that those big businesses often have their own mines. Even if they don't have their own mines, their supply is monopolized by some leaders and related households. But this time, a leading figure in the Free City of Krakow actually asked for 20,000 tons of coal. Not only did he directly clear out Fredronov's inventory, he also first made up for the shortfall with a batch of coal on credit. Although the other party requires installment payment, as long as this transaction is completed, he can enjoy his life in peace. But before that, Fredronov still needed to go to Krakow to get the down payment. After all, he had a lot of coal orders on credit. He was originally in a good mood, but after more than 10 hours of driving, he encountered a lunatic who kept talking to himself. Even a clay Buddha would have accumulated enough anger in this era. Problems are usually solved with fists, but I couldn't bear the fact that there were two strong men sitting next to the other party, while there were only two civilian staff beside me. Maybe he was tired of watching, or maybe he wanted to share the joy in his chest with others, but the man in the trench coat opposite him actually took the initiative to start a conversation. Sir, are you planning to go to Krakow, Fred? Ronov rolled his eyes at the other party and said to himself, the next stop is just there. Can you tell me this is not nonsense? However, out of professional habit, he still handed over a business card that read, Mompony Coal. Fred Ronov, the somewhat strange man in a trench coat opposite, also handed back a business card that read, Pest Gunpowder Processing Factory, Jaraj Sinek. Only then did Fred Ronov answer the other party's question with some surprise. Mr. Sinek, I have long admired your name. I really want to go to Krakow this time. Then he added another nonsense. Are you going to Krakow too, Juraj? Sinek didn't feel embarrassed at all. He took out a lighter and lit the paper cigarette in his mouth. He took a big sip and then puffed out a few smoke rings happily, seemingly casually asking, Mr. Ronov, how much coal do the Poles want? Fred Ronov didn't think this was a trade secret. On the contrary, He knew very well that no matter what era, those who played with arms must be powerful people. At this time, it was beneficial and harmless to show his strength and make friends with them. 50,000 tons. Cough, cough, cough. Cynic was choked and coughed for a moment. He took a deep breath and then spat out a mouthful of phlegm with a hurrah, but he said slowly, these Poles really planning to keep playing for a few years. Fuck. Fred Ronov was a Czech living in Italy. He didn't understand the word, but he felt vaguely uneasy. Mr. Ronov, this train is full of people going to Krakow. Another. Nonsense. Fred Ronov cursed secretly, and then listened to the other party continue. There are many people like you and me, Fred. Ronov was surprised and asked, what do you mean? You mean, yes, it's just like you thought. It's all big deals, from daily necessities such as grain, vegetables, livestock, cloth, and coal, to steel, gunpowder, and cement. They want it all. Uraj. Cynic still looked calm and composed, but Fred Ronov had already thought of something and couldn't help but sweat like rain. Impossible. What's impossible? It's not the first time for the Poles, Fred. Ronov's throat twitched. Then, can we still get our money? Of course. After all, the Poles are not bandits. That's good. Hearing Mr. Cynic's words made Mr. Ronov's nervous mood relax a little, but that's just the down payment. If you want to get the balance. Cynic didn't continue, but just smiled meaningfully. Although he didn't say it clearly, his smile alone said it all. Having already boarded the pirate ship this time, Fred Ronov looked at the crowd in the carriage. Although everyone is busy with work, everyone is surrounded by secretaries and bodyguards. There is no doubt that everyone is a big shot. But in the face of the power of the country, can they really do anything? Didn't the Austrian Empire officials notice the battles caused by the Poles? How could the Austrian Empire's police system not know about such a large-scale mobilization? But the top brass in Vienna did not pay much attention to it. Especially in the opinion of Prince Metternich, this is a good time to annex the free city of Krakow. After all, the Russians have already recognized the validity of the previous agreement. The railway between Austria and Krakow ensured that the troops of the Austrian Empire could enter Krakow within one day after the latter declared an uprising. Annexing Krakow and completely nipping the bud of Polish Zionism in the cradle is what the Austrian Empire needs to do most. In fact, there are 100,000 troops of the Austrian Empire in Galicia alone, but there are only 200,000 to 300,000 troops in Krakow. Is it possible that they can still mobilize all the people? However, the Austrian Empire had 420,000 troops. The only thing that worries Prince Metternich are the refugees from the Dniester River. Once these people are incited, they will be a very terrifying force. But fortunately, Franz had already cut these people into pieces, and the organization was horribly loose. At the same time, they had no weapons or food for the winter. In fact, the main force of Verlstadion is near the royal territory, which can not only help the refugees solve their problems, but also solve the problems of the refugees when they occur. Chapter 729. A speech. With a screeching sound of brakes, the train slowly stopped at the station. Then the car door opened with a rumble, and a man wearing a windbreaker and a low-brimmed hat walked out. He took off his low-brimmed hat and was about to say hello to the city when he was squeezed in by the disorderly crowd. Even the two bodyguards, no matter how strong they were, could not withstand the torrent of passengers. The man who finally escaped from the center of the whirlpool stepped on the solid gravel road and walked towards the platform. He struggled to raise his head to make himself appear firm and wise. Just a long hiss of the whistle and a curse from the conductor behind him forced him to jog a few steps. You damn old man, walking so slowly. I want to die. The man looked very embarrassed, but the people on the platform still greeted him cordially. Fred Ronov looked strange, but then thought that it was not surprising that this kind of arms dealer had several friends. After all, there are always people who like to fight. Soon the man, the crowd that greeted him, the coal merchants, and the crowd of all kinds were all running towards their goals. An hour later, in a factory in Krakow. To be honest, the workers thought it was strange. All the machinery in the factory had been removed, and the boss even gave them white bread. Everyone was confused, but the overseer with a whip in his hand brought them back to reality. because anyone trying to leave the factory or whispering would be beaten. However, Polish workers have also become accustomed to it. In fact, they are no different from serfs. They have just moved to a different place to work. Even the whip has not changed. At this time, a man wearing a windbreaker and a low-brimmed hat walked in. The factory boss rushed over like a homeless man who wanted to give alms. He bent down humbly and spoke. The workers could not hear clearly, but they knew the other person must be a big shot. The man walked up to the high platform where the factory owner usually stood and said in a very loud voice, "Do you know me?" "I don't know," several busy workers responded, but they were immediately whipped by the supervisors. "It doesn't matter. From today on every Pole will know me. Everyone from Ireland to Kitten is waiting with eager anticipation, and the world will tremble." The workers in the field were speechless, but the boss signaled for applause, and everyone applauded. The supervisors took back their whips with satisfaction. The man on the stage didn't care about what happened under the stage, and just said to himself, "I know you don't believe it, but I'm standing here today to help you create history." Poland. What a wonderful name. It symbolizes freedom and courage, as well as indestructible will. We Poles are the best nation in the world. Our ancestors blocked the Mongols here, and we protected Europe. Civilization protected Christendom. When the Teutonic Knights swept across Europe, we were the only country that dared to stand up and win. The Russians are like the fourth natural disaster in the east, and it is we who are blocking their steps and drag their Tsar behind our horses. Ridiculous Austria. If it weren't for us, their mentally retarded emperor would have long been a trophy of the Arabs, and Vienna would have been replaced by a warmonger. Muhammad. We are the spear of God. Only we can defeat the Ottomans, and today, we Poles can only endure the shame of losing our country and our family, and we have to live in a foreign country. But that doesn't mean we lost. We never give up. We never give up our desire for freedom and independence. This spirit has carried us through some of our darkest times, and now the time has come for us to fight for our freedom, to resist the demons who deprive us of our rights, to challenge the butchers who oppress us, go kill the invaders who trample on our land, and defeat all enemies that hinder our freedom. This is not only an uprising, but also a correction of the world's mistakes. Our art, language, writing, everything is higher than any other country or nation in the world. We must establish a new order to get us back to our rightful place. I promise you equal freedom for all Poles. However, the enemy is powerful and cruel. They are trying to suppress our voices, destroy our bodies, kill our dreams, but we will not give in. No one will betray. No one will give up. No one will back down. Nobody. We will be the light that breaks through the darkness. Clear all obstacles with the power of thunder. We will use our actions to prove our courage and determination. Our power is unstoppable and irresistible. Whether they are Prussian barbarians, Russian Tatars, or Austrian fools, they will all be trampled under our feet. Poland's victory is not just our victory. It is a victory for all mankind. Let us keep moving forward and fight for freedom. Fight for democracy. Fight for the independence of the Kingdom of Poland. Any warriors who heroically sacrifice themselves in the fight for freedom will ascend to heaven, and your sacrifices will become the cornerstone of Poland's restoration. I will remember your courage. Now pick up your guns. I declare that the Kingdom of Poland will be restored from now on. I, Landry Promai, will lead you to the other side of victory. The man took off his dusty coat, revealing the brand new royal robe underneath, and took off his old low-brimmed hat. He then put his hand on his head, as if there was magic, making his long-backed head shine under the light of the gas lamp. At this time, someone in the crowd shouted okay. Some of the confused crowd also cheered, and some applauded. Then someone shouted long live Landry Promai. The crowd followed suit, and shouted long live Landry Promai, especially the factory owners, the college students and the Polish reunifiers who came here were moved to tears, but the workers on the side were a little numb. Then boxes of weapons were moved into the factory, and the workers took on weapons under the urging of the supervisors or war supervisors. Then they were herded like sheep toward the arsenal and the city hall. At the same time, the same thing was happening in Poznan, controlled by Prussia, Warsaw controlled by Russia, and Lviv controlled by Austria. Transnistria, royal territory. Recently, there has always been a group of people wandering around the manors and refugee camps. They all talk about one thing, and that is how beautiful the Kingdom of Poland is, and how dark and cruel the rule of the Austrian Empire is. As long as we can go back to the Kingdom of Poland, everyone can have enough to eat, and have their own jobs and houses. As long as there is leadership from the Polish nobles, there will be no enemies or difficulties that cannot be overcome. As long as people can launch an uprising, the Kingdom of Poland can be revived, and the Polish nobles can return to Poland to lead the Polish people. It's the end of the month. If you have a ticket, give it to me. Chapter 730. A loud noise in the sky. Galicia, royal domain. The agitators in Transnistria were not clever. Most of them had entered from Prussia later, and some were inexplicably found in the refugee camps. The latter was easy to detect. After all, Franz registered all refugees entering the refugee camp in detail, so this group of people were isolated as soon as they entered, and were closely monitored thereafter. However, these guys were so unscrupulous that they simply ignored the Austrian managers and directly communicated with the refugees in Polish and Ruthenian. In fact, most officials in Galicia can understand these two languages. After all, some of them are Poles or Yureks. The agitators who entered Austria from the Prussian border were also easy to identify because they did not look like refugees themselves, especially when they were very resistant to the uniforms issued by Franz. You must know that it was not easy for people at the bottom to wear a new set of clothes at that time. Many people could not wear new clothes several times in their lives. The reason why Hungary's single-clothed nobles are called single-clothed nobles is not because they like to wear single clothes, but because they are so poor that they only have one piece of clothing, let alone the nobles who are such commoners and serfs. It's really abnormal for a refugee to refuse such a big offer. There is no way. After all, members of the Polish Restoration Army are not nobles, but also intellectuals. Even those exiles have a good life in various countries no one has ever suffered, let alone imagine it. Both London and Paris are supported by government subsidies and charitable institutions, and there is even a profit-making organization called the Polish Nationalist Army. Switzerland is also very friendly to Polish exiles, and for this reason it is even willing to fight against the three countries of Prussia, Austria and Poland. The target of the Kingdom of Sardinia is actually the Young Italy party, but the Poles have close contacts with it, and even actively join it. Alberto, King of Sardinia, will naturally not tolerate this group of guys who everyone shouts to beat. In short, it is not difficult to identify the spies of the Polish Nationalist Army, but Franz is not in a hurry to find them. On the contrary, he puts these scourges into different refugee camps according to the grid. Of course, Franz would not let this mob run wild. Wherever there were spies, he would send more preachers and missionaries to fight against them. In doing so, Franz wanted to identify those who were weak-willed and unstable, and manually screen out those who were most suitable to integrate into the empire. At the same time, he also wanted to see how powerful his propaganda machine was. As for relying solely on people's consciousness, Franz is not optimistic about this approach. Because of people's inherent social nature and genetic herd mentality, the crowd is very easily induced and triggers the herd effect. The so-called herd effect can even cause people to lose their most basic judgment and become a mob. Therefore, allowing the other party to carry out unilateral propaganda will not only expand the area of attack and cause a large number of innocent casualties, but also make all previous efforts in vain, which is contrary to Franz's original purpose. In addition to Franz's manner, some people dressed as priests also appeared in Galicia, Russian Poland, and Prussian Poland. They roamed the countryside and slums to build momentum for the Polish uprising. Arsenal in Krakow. Although Bartosz Slowacki was the commander of the Krakow city defense force, he actually only had a few hundred men, half of whom were military bands for specific combat effectiveness. You can refer to the Vienna city defense force in Austria next door, but by coincidence, Bartosz Slowak's headquarters is above the arsenal. He had felt a little unlucky before, but he didn't expect that a disaster would befall him. Faced with the Polish Nationalist Army, which was holding a large number of people hostage, Commander Bartosz didn't want to risk it with eggs, but he didn't want to be complicit. After all, as a true upper-class person, he knew better than anyone else what the former was, but as Bartosz was the commander of Krakow's city defense force, he could not openly oppose the restoration of the country. So Commander Bartas suddenly thought of a way to balance loyalty and filial piety, which was to directly blow up the arsenal. In this way, both sides can make sense. If people from the Polish Restoration Army ask, he will say that the Austrians did it. If the Austrians come, he can take credit for it. As for the rebel Commander Bartas, he naturally couldn't participate. After all, the headquarters was above the arsenal, so getting injured was definitely inevitable. Having made up his mind, Commander Bartas asked his cronies to secretly blow up the arsenal, and on the other hand he took a few cronies to the kitchen. After arriving in the kitchen, Commander Bartas sent away the cooks and helpers with a few words. Then he turned the camp pot upside down and frantically used the bottom of the pot to smear himself. When he went out, he grabbed a handful of soil from the ground and poured it over his head before finding an alley, hide inside and wait for the explosion before going back. As for those who are still in the headquarters, they are naturally the victims. After all, the play has to be real for people to believe it. On the other hand, the ranks of the Polish Nationalist Army are growing continuously. In addition to some of them being spontaneous, most of them are strong men who are pulled in by knocking on the door. The method of recruiting people is also very simple and crude. That is, a large group of people stand at the door of a shop or residence, knock on the door and ask, "Do you want Poland to be restored? If you are willing, then come out and join the team. If you are not willing, then the dozens of people at the door are not freeloaders. But even if you are willing, you must hand over your family's money and food to defend against foreign enemies." Just like this, one by one, a team of nearly 10,000 people developed in a short time. When the team entered the arsenal in great force, several guards, although they had no orders from above, did not dare to stop such a large crowd and could only hand over the keys obediently. However, when the door opened, the mechanism was pulled and people could only hear something falling, but they were soon drowned out by excited shouts following a series of loud noises. Almost the entire arsenal was razed to the ground, with broken walls and bloody corpses everywhere. The crowd, that had been joyful just now, as if they were joining the celebration, began to mourn, and Commander Bartas walked through the ruins to express his loyalty to Landry Promai. At the same time, in front of the city hall gate, several members of the Free City of Krakow stood in front of the Polish Zionist army. They do not believe that the so-called restoration of the country can really succeed, and they do not want this last Polish legacy to be annexed or looted. Although they did not know the secret agreement between Russia and Austria, they were certain that Krakow could not block the attack of the great powers. "Bring out Landry Prome. We need to talk to him," shouted one congressman, but he was greeted only with jeers and curses. "You old fools, get out of here. His Majesty Landry Promai has no time to see you. He is distributing weapons in the arsenal and arming the whole city to drive the three countries of Russia, and Austria out of our land." At this time, or thunder sounded. Chapter 731 Getting ready to appear. Crazy. You and Landry Prome are crazy. Our city is connected to the Austrian Empire, and they will know what happens here in a few hours. In one day the Austrians will send troops to surround us, and then just like in 1241, our cities and our homes will be destroyed. Several activists who had recently joined the Polish Nationalist Army did not listen to the nonsense of a group of old men, but were driven out of the city hall with sticks. They planned to use this place as a temporary palace for His Majesty Landry Promai. Said a young man, stepping on a former congressman. "The Austrians can't come. His Majesty Landry Promai has a brilliant plan and sent people to blow up all the railways leading to Krakow." At this time, the faces of several old council members became even more ugly, because it was built with the money of the Free City of Krakow, and the railway is the city's source of wealth. Railways around Krakow were bombed one after another, and of course the news of the bombing of the arsenal also spread from Krakow. However, this news is not fatal to Landry Promai, because he has purchased a large amount of supplies from various places in advance. In the name of the Free City of Krakow, and Krakow is not only a commercial capital, but also a university town. There are enough experts, scholars, and craftsmen here to organize an arsenal. At this time, Landry Promy is most concerned about how many people can be mobilized to defend Krakow Point. Although Landry Promy ordered people to blow up the railway, there was nothing he could do about the carrier pigeon point. Therefore, Vienna soon received news of the rebellion in Krakow, which made Prince Metternich very excited. After all, being able to annex a rich traditional city is not a concept at all, and taking charge of some poor ravines in the Balkans, and in the eyes of Prince Metternich, some of Franz's actions are very likely to offend the Russians and the British. The Holy Alliance and the Vienna system were Metternich's favorite works. He may have been a little behind the times on some things, but he was very clear about Austria's fundamental interest in the Russian-Austrian alliance. Without Russia's goodwill, every step Austria takes will become difficult. Back to the rebellion in Galicia. Metternich was ready to ask Count Stadion to suppress it immediately, and then send a group of troops to take over Krakow. Count Latter, do you have any suitable candidates? Before the Minister of War could speak, Franz jumped out first. Prime Minister, I want to go. Franz naturally agreed to go to the royal family, and Grand Duke Franz Karol could easily solve it. Although Grand Duke Louis had some minor conflicts with the former, he was very clear about his position, so he would not cause trouble. Franz's departure would be difficult for Latter and Prince Metternich, because doing so would undoubtedly increase uncertainty. Count Korolaf felt that Franz was right. After all, the entire Austrian Empire was looking forward to the birth of a wise king. Moreover, the momentum has been created for so many years, and now it is time for the real master to perform. Archduke Franz, this trip is very dangerous. I suggest sending 200,000 troops, although this number is exaggerated. Count Latter and Prince Metternich agree with it. After all, if Franz goes to this battle to quell the chaos, it will be an exhibition match. Just like when an army of 100,000 attacked Serbia, which had given up resistance, it could only win but not lose, and not only must it win, but it must win beautifully. What is the concept of sending 200,000 troops? After two frictions with France, the Austrian Empire sent only 200,000 troops. Add in the 100,000 troops already stationed in Galicia, and the total force will reach a terrifying 300,000. This is definitely the largest military operation in the Austrian Empire after the Napoleonic Wars. It may even cause panic in Prussia next door. After all, the latter standing army only has a standing army of only 200,000. Franz was a little speechless. The purpose of his want to go was to quickly counter the rebellion, and it would take at least several weeks for Austria to gather the 200,000 troops and transport them to Galicia. Moreover, such an effort to mobilize troops and mobilize people not only waste people and money, but also make surrounding countries either ready to take action or become frightened. Is really not worth the gain. I think that with 3,000 people and the cooperation of Count Stadion, we should be able to quickly suppress this uprising. After all, historically, the Galician uprising was suppressed by the people themselves before the Austrian Empire had time to send troops to suppress it. Facing the ferocious serfs, the rebels even took the initiative to seek protection from the Austrian army. 3,000 people. How could these old foxes not know what those 3,000 people were referring to? Franz's Dragon Knights had arrived in Vienna in advance. It's just that 3,000 people are too few. In their eyes, they are full of rebels. If Franz does not go, 20,000 people will need to be sent. If Franz goes, at least 200,000 people will have to be sent. Archduke Franz, you have only seen war in books. Real war is very dirty and obscene. In order to win, the enemy will spare no effort to use all kinds of despicable means, and the morale of the soldiers is usually directly related to the number of people. If you only bring a few thousand people with you, and you see tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of rebels on the other side, some cowards may kidnap you first. Count Latter's words were very unpleasant, but he told the truth. It's just that Franz is not going to force the so-called rebels. He just wants to solve some problems once and for all, and get some more loot along the way. To be honest, Franz really didn't regard the Polish Zionist army as an opponent. But the old man's words still had to be listened to. After a final negotiation, the two sides decided that Albrecht would serve as Franz's adjutant and lead 60,000 people into the Galician Bochnia fortress. to wait for reinforcement to arrive. Point afterwards, General Henor will lead 100,000 follow-up troops to join Franz's troops, and then march towards Krakow together. Count Stadion received an order to expand the defense range, but not to take the initiative to attack. Point this strange order puzzled Count Stadion, and he even began to wonder if the Russians and Prussians were behind it, so Vienna needed him to stay put. Point although the entire formerly Polish region was in turmoil, there were not many real uprisings. In particular, the uprisings in Warsaw and Poznan were not successful at all, and members of the Polish Nationalist Army were arrested while still having meetings. In fact, Count Stadion also knew the situation in Krakow, and he had the ability to send people to kill it before it became powerful, but the orders from above prevented him from acting rashly. Point a lot of strange orders had already made Count Stadion suffocate. By the time the rebellion broke out, he had already mobilized his troops and prepared to raze the city to the ground once and for all. Point as a result, the order from Vienna came again. He really missed the era without telegraph. Point what Count Stadion didn't know was that beneath the surface calm of Galicia, bloody massacres were being staged. Chapter 732. Inside Krakow. Point although the arsenal was bombed, Landry Prome did not panic because he had backup, but he could not leave the soldiers empty-handed. Point it happened that the president of the Student Union of Krakow University spoke up. Even though this kid usually acted like a leader, he would immediately reveal his true colors when he encountered a problem. Point Landry Prome liked this kind of person the most. He remembered that the child's name was Brzezinski, chairman. Brzezinski. Oh, no, Commander Brzezinski. I, Landry Prome, I officially appoint you as the commander of Krakow's city defense army. Do your best. I'm optimistic about you, your majesty. I will definitely live up to your high expectations. The newly appointed Commander Brzezinski was so excited that his whole body was shaking, but he still asked with some worry, but now the arsenal has been bombed. What should I do, Your Excellency, Commander? There are not only weapons in the arsenal in the city. Then Landry Prome patted Commander Brzezinski's shoulder meaningfully. Point the Polish veteran and his men on the side were very puzzled. Landry Prome first violated the agreement and did not establish a republic, but instead became some bullshit. Landry Prome, you must know that the throne of Poland belongs to the Saxon family. Now even if we really win the three countries of Russia, Prussia, and Austria, we still have to fight the Polish throne succession war with Saxony. Point what's more important is that General Bem does not seem to have a formal military position. Point however, I have to say that not all the Polish restorationists were so unbearable, such as General Bem in front of me. Although the Polish Restoration Army captured Krakow almost without any blood at this time, the real challenge has not yet come. Point there are still 100,000 Austrian troops in Galicia. Although they have sent people to blow up the railway tracks, the enemy will arrive at the city in 3 weeks at most, even if they come on foot. Point this is under the premise that Russia and Prussia do not send troops. If Russia and Prussia send troops, the Russians will mobilize 150,000 troops within 2 months, and Prussia will also dispatch no less than 50,000 troops. In other words, if the Austrian Empire cannot be defeated at the beginning of the war, then Krakow will be besieged by the 300,000 troops of the Holy Alliance in 2 months. When the time comes, the siege of Warsaw will happen again. Bem can't help clenching his fists. He doesn't want to repeat the same mistake and let everyone die in vain. Mr. Prome, I think the top priority is Landry Prome glanced sideways at Bem. He didn't see fear or panic in the veteran's eyes. It seemed that the latter didn't know where he was wrong. General Bem, didn't you hear what Commander Brzezinski said? We are currently short of weapons. I'm now appointing you as the deputy commander of the Krakow City Defense Force to fully help Commander Brzezinski collect weapons. I still want to discuss the future of this country with ministers, so I won't accompany you. After speaking, Landry Prome took the people back to the Royal Palace, formerly Krakow City Hall, and Brzezinski quickly saluted respectfully. Your Majesty, I will send you off. No need. Work hard. The future is yours. Landry Prome took out his gun and handed it to the young man. This is my sidearm. If anyone opposes you, kill him with one shot. Landry Prome glanced at Bem and then patted Brzezinski's shoulder again, who had mist in his eyes. Although Landry Prome humiliated General Bem, He knew that this was not the time for a quarrel, and that he had to immediately fortify the wall and clear the country without leaving any supplies for the Austrians, destroying as many bridges and roads as possible. Child, now we have to send people outside the city. It's Commander Brzezinski, the young man corrected point at this time. Brzezinski, who had been promoted to the commander of the Krakow city defense force, no longer had any respect for this former Polish hero, but began to feel that the other party was violating his authority. You damn brat. Why are you still showing off here now? What does an empty commander have to be proud of? Some Polish soldiers who came with General Bem were very angry. Before the leader could finish speaking, he saw Brzezinski take out his gun. Fortunately, General Bem, who was on the side, stopped the bullet from flying out against the man's scalp in time. You coward. How dare you disobey my orders? No wonder you lost in Warsaw. You were unorganized, undisciplined deserters. Brzezinski yelled angrily, and these words deeply hurt the hearts of these veterans. Back then, they had fought with the Russians with passion, until they ran out of ammunition and food, and had to leave with their lives destroyed, and the city destroyed. Only by withdrawing the soldiers can the Russians not be left with an excuse to massacre the city. Now they are back risking their lives, but they are greeted by bullets from their own people. A group of veterans were surprisingly angry, but Brzezinski's student soldiers rushed over and pointed their guns at the veterans. Seeing that an internal fight was inevitable, Bem stood in the middle and said, "Commander Brzezinski, please forgive him. I will let him go now. Do you think this is okay?" "Go. Where to go? Run away. Lock them all up. Who dares to resist justice on the spot?" Brzezinski roared angrily while holding his hat that had just fallen off with his gun. All his student soldiers were already holding on to the trigger not to be outdone. The former Polish veterans all raised their guns. At this time, Bem shouted, "Put your guns down. They are bloody men, but they are also Polish soldiers, and the duty of a soldier is to obey." The veterans put down their guns one after another, and the student soldiers immediately surrendered their weapons. "Commander Brzezinski, for the sake of the Polish motherland, I want to see land right from me. My men are professional artillerymen. Without them, it is impossible for you to defend Krakow." Bem pleaded, but Brzezinski was unmoved, and instead shouted to his men, "Can't you all hear me? Lock them up. Don't let them out without my order." The student soldiers, city defense troops, and the surrendered police force immediately stepped forward to tie up the veterans, wiping their shoulders and backs. Kurwa. Poland cursed, gag their mouths. After a period of confusion, Brzezinski finally began his plan to close the gun. "Where are we going to get a gun?" said a Krakow University student who looked a bit timid in his glasses. "Wherever there are guns, we'll go there," Brzezinski replied. "Where, idiot?" Poland cursed. Brzezinski said helplessly, "You ignorant fools. Of course you have to go to the weapons store to get weapons." At this time, someone asked in confusion, "But we have no money, idiot." Poland cursed. Brzezinski kicked the man hard in the butt, then shook the gun in his hand and said, "We have this. Why do we need money, Rob?" Another word came out of the man's mouth. He immediately realized his mistake and quickly covered his mouth, but Brzezinski still heard it. "I'm telling you. Now Poland is restored. We are expropriating, not robbing." Chapter 733. Brzezinski quickly led a group of people to the entrance of a weapons store. With such chaos in the city, this was the best time for the weapons store business. However, he saw a large group of people coming from a distance, which scared the customers to the point of turning into animals. The boss also wanted to close the door quickly to avoid these evil stars, but unexpectedly the young man in the lead stopped him with 3 steps at a time. "Sir, are you Polish?" The weapon shop owner shook his head violently in fear and then nodded wildly. Brzezinski was a little helpless, but he asked with a cunning smile, "Ah, you patriotic?" "I am patriotic. I'm Polish, and I love Poland." The boss was busy trying to prove his innocence. After hearing this, Brzezinski nodded with satisfaction and continued, "Patriot, now the territory of our great motherland Poland is being trampled by the 3 evil countries of Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Shouldn't you do something for the motherland?" "I The owner of the weapon shop looked at the high-spirited young man in front of him, and the group of young men behind him, and showed a smile that was uglier than crying. "I do very good. This patriot thanks you for your support. You really know the general situation, and take the overall situation into consideration. On behalf of Poland, I thank you. Brothers, pull out the weapons and arm more people, for Poland. For Poland." A group of soldiers from the new Krakow City Defense Army rushed into the weapons store. The weapons originally locked in glass boxes were smashed open, and more people entered the interior and basement of the weapons store to search. After a while, the weapons store was completely empty, and even the old-fashioned matchlock guns and machetes were dragged out. The owner of the weapon shop was stunned as he looked at his own hard work. This was his coffin book. Now it was all gone, but his life was finally saved. At this time Brezina patted the boss on the shoulder and handed over an axe gun. "What are you still doing? Come with us, then." The owner of the weapons store had to join the looting army. In addition to the weapons stores, bakeries, and tailor shops, they were not spared. Occasionally, there were a few people who wanted money rather than their lives. Those shopkeepers who were first robbed and then coerced into the city defense army gave up. They don't love Poland. They are the lackeys of foreigners. Kill them. Under some coercion and inducement, the people inside either accepted the reality and joined the Polish nationalist army, or the people outside set fire to force the people inside to submit. Sometimes when one side's energy and blood surges, a battle will inevitably break out, and the winner will naturally take everything and trample everything. From time to time, women's cries could be heard, but this was nothing compared to the gunshots and the crackling sounds of burning buildings that rang out from time to time. Soon Krakow's new city defense troops, like the evil fallen humans in Devilman, held high the broken limbs of various human bodies and paraded and cheered. When human beings consciously occupy the great righteousness, they will use all means to eliminate hostile evil. It only took them 3 days to turn Krakow, or 1,000-year-old city, into a living hell. This was not Brezina's original intention, but with the expansion of the city defense army, a large number of ruffians, rogues, and gangs also joined it. In addition, for the development of Krakow in recent years, the poor who have suffered too much also need to vent. Not to mention the unjust, false, and wrongful convictions and frame-ups created by some big figures. In order to eradicate dissidents, the most terrifying thing is to release the prisoners in the prison. These people are really doing everything they can. The establishment of the Polish Nationalist Army was already loose, and with the temporary expansion dozens of times, the so-called discipline could not restrain anyone at all. Brezina was initially a little uneasy when he saw the chaos in the city, but Landry Promi praised him highly. After all, the increase in the number of troops and supplies was real, and soon the city was conquered by the Polish Restoration Army, so they decided to start marching outside the city. Landry Promi was not in the mood to care about the situation in the city at this time. He was still busy with the coronation. Poland is a country with deep religious sentiments. If a king is not recognized by the church, he will naturally not be able to become a real king. Originally, Landry Promi had already negotiated a price with the old Pope Gregory XVI. But who knew that the latter suddenly died suddenly, and the new Pope Pius IX was an inexperienced fellow. Not only did he refuse to recognize his position as the King of Poland, he even asked all Poles to pay back the tithes they had owed over the years. That's billions of pounds. With that much money, he could buy the entire United States directly. But he must have an influential bishop to support him, so the old priest Peter Szegedy became the first choice. It's just that the old priest is still fomenting rebellion in the countryside, but the agreed time has passed. Logically speaking, Peter Szegedy should have arrived in Krakow. After getting the approval of Landry Promi, Brezina became more and more ambitious, and he led a large force of people into the countryside of Krakow. The autumn wind blows, the waves of wheat rise and fall, and the smell of food and nature is everywhere, which makes everyone less tainted with the smell of blood. Many of Brezina's student soldiers were large landowners outside the city, but they were not familiar with the countryside. After all, it was very embarrassing to say that they were country people at that time. Brzezinta felt a little frustrated because the Polish Nationalist Army and the Polish Peasants' Union had already agreed that the former would be responsible for collecting supplies in the city and the latter would be responsible for collecting supplies in the countryside and cooperate with the former to transport the supplies back to the city. But the current situation is that the wheat is still growing well in the ground. Brzezinta couldn't help but spat. These magicians are really useless. I don't know how that old bastard Peter Szygany confuses his majesty Landry Promii and insists that we pay attention to him. According to the tradition of the Kingdom of Poland, we really need a bishop to crown our king. Brzezinta's classmate said. HMPH. Brzezinta said bitterly as he blew out 2 streams of white air from his nose. Your Majesty should be like Napoleon and crown yourself. Haha. Yes. Once this battle is won, the president will at least be a prince. Don't call me president, call me commander. Haha. Okay, commander. A group of people chatting and laughing discovered a mill built by the Austrian Empire, with the emblem of the Habsburg family still hanging on it. This was created by the latter in order to win over the people at the bottom of Galicia. I have already mentioned this in the previous document and will not go into details here. But at this time, it was extremely annoying to Brzezinta and his men. Come here, call all the nearby villagers. Yes, where is the owner of this mill? I know. After these days of fermentation of what happened in Krakow, some well-informed people outside the city had already known about it in advance, so Brzezinta recovered many scoundrels and village tyrants along the way. These guys naturally know what is going on in the countryside. Very detailed. The next chapter is a story that some people have never heard, while others are familiar with it. Chapter 734 Asking the Master to Die. Krakow borders Galicia. Brzezinta and his team sat in front of the old mill. He looked at the red sky in the distance, which was the flames of Krakow. These flames will burn across Poland, across Europe, across the Atlantic Ocean, across the wastelands of Siberia, and unite the whole world under the banner of Emperor Landry Promii, and he, Brzezinta, will serve as His Majesty's vanguard across the Himalayas and drink from the Amazon River. At this time, one of his subordinates whispered something beside Commander Brzezinta, and the commander looked towards the closed door of the mill. With a clang, the wooden door of the mill was kicked open. Inside, an old man led a donkey and was still walking in front of the small millstone. From time to time, he picked up the grains on the side and poured them into the big millstone. The water wheel slowly shook under the action of the flowing water. Millstone, hey, old man, you are hiding here and eavesdropping on our conversation. Are you a spy for the Austrians? A shirtless man with a musket in his hand asked angrily. The people around him immediately responded and prepared to eat the old man and the donkey alive. Brzezinta raised his hand to stop the barking of his men. He straightened his clothes and asked in a very gentle tone, "Old man, what are you doing?" Perhaps the sound of the water flow was too loud and the old man seemed not to hear it at all and just mechanically repeated the previous actions. Brzezinta was the president of the student union at school. He was also an elite member of the Polish Restoration Army. Now he has been promoted to the commander of the Krakow City Defense Army. In the future, he may be the marshal of the kingdom. He didn't have much patience, so in order not to lose face, he raised the tone and asked again, "Old man, what are you doing?" This time the old man responded, but the answer was still lukewarm, grinding wheat. This made Brzezinta feel very depressed. All his kindness on a whim was given to this old and deaf serf. However, he must show enough intelligence and ability in front of his men in order to establish prestige. Did you know that Krakow has been liberated? The old man glanced at the young man, finally put down his work, sat on the pile of grains and sighed sadly, then took out a pipe that had been used for decades and started smoking. The old man's reaction made Brzezinta even more confused, but he soon figured out that all lacquers were like this, but he would not kill the opponent with one shot. He would make the opponent die from soul to body. Did you know that this mill is owned by Austrians? No. The old man's words had no tone, which made Brzezinta a little angry. As the nearby residents were driven to the mill, he felt that the time had come. Then, do you know why the Austrians want to build mills on our land? Before The old man could answer. Brezina shouted loudly to himself. To plunder our wealth. To secretly poison our food. To confuse our poor compatriots. Brezina's words were immediately met with cheers and curses, because of the evil deeds of the Austrians. We have to bury those bewitched compatriots with our own hands. I'm really saddened, Your Majesty Commander. You are so kind. You don't have to be sad. Sacrifice is inevitable. You still have us. We will always support Your Excellency the Commander. Long live Commander Brezina. The old man was not affected by the warm atmosphere around him, and just talked to himself. I only know that in the past, grinding wheat required silver coins, but now only copper coins are enough. The so-called poison and magic are even more nonsense, because it and I are in charge of this mill. The old man pointed to his donkey. Although Brezina could hear it, the crowd farther away certainly couldn't point, but these words were enough. Brezina raised his hand again, and the surroundings fell silent for an instant. The poor old man has been bewitched by the Austrians. He cannot hear the call of the Polish motherland. Now I sentence him to death. Death. Penalty. Death. Penalty. Some people cheered with expectant expressions on their faces, just like the audience waiting for the opening of a big show, while some people looked at hen and didn't know what they were thinking. Soon the gallows was erected. At this time, Brezina started his speech again. Although it may be a little worse than Land Rhyprom, most of the content is still the same. Written before, read it yourself. The victory of Poland is the victory of all mankind, and it is also the victory of civilization. Under the leadership of Land Rhyprom, as long as we drive away the Austrians, Prussians, and Russians, then we can rebuild the kingdom of Poland and let you all live the good life you once had. The old man on the side used a louder voice to cover up Brezina. No, dear sir, it won't be like that. You just want to drive out the most benevolent ruler in this land, and then let this country go to ruin. My father once told me that when the Polish Commonwealth still existed, the lords could beat the serfs arbitrarily, but the serfs had no way to appeal. If you drive the emperor out of this land, then every one of you will want to feel like a lone man, and you will beat the serfs here as you did in the past, when the Polish Commonwealth existed. Hang him. What are you still doing? Hang this devil. Traitor. You damn hams. Ham is a scornful term used by Polish nobles for civilians. Brezina shouted angrily that the two executioners were actually indifferent. In fact, in order to lower the morale of the other party, he specifically asked the old man's family to execute the execution, so that the execution would have the best effect. However, he is not afraid of the other party's resistance. After all, the families of the two young men are in his hands. Generally speaking, the old will accept their fate, but the young will be swallowed up by the guilt after killing their family members and become his most loyal believers. The old man's words immediately resonated with the surrounding serfs, and the restless crowd attacked Brezina's city defense army. During the harvest season, serfs armed with various farm tools directly attacked Brezina's team. Because the distance was too close, the so-called advantages of firearms were not obvious, and most of the serfs in nearby villages were brothers and relatives. When they saw their blood relatives fall, they thought more of revenge than escape. He knew that he had to kill the culprit in front of him to quell the riot. Otherwise this show to expand the army would turn into a disaster. Brezina pulled out his pistol, but before he could fire, a pitchfork pierced his arm like a javelin. Kill these bastards of Polish nobles. Long live Emperor Ferdinand. Ferdinand I was the emperor of the Austrian Empire at this time, the surrounding serfs shouted, and then rushed over as if they didn't care about their lives. The so-called soldiers under Brezina were just a group of Krakow University students and hooligans who had never seen blood. Those who had been coerced had now begun to turn against the enemy and massacre the demons that had destroyed them. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 735 Tour Group. After an hour, Brezina's handsome young face looked ferocious and twisted at this moment. A cigarette rod was inserted directly into his eye socket, and red and white liquid was seeping out from the wound. Brezina's eyes were wide open, full of doubt, unwillingness, and fear. His pistol and boots had long since become the trophies of someone unknown, and someone would later take away his clothes and pants after all. Serfs may have never touched such high-end goods in their lives. The serfs were searching everywhere for the remaining defeated soldiers of the Polish Restoration Army, and even the corpses had to be patched up with a few stabs. The King's division, which was so arrogant a moment ago, has now become a frightened beast, running around everywhere, but no one will pity them. Because the Polish nobles have done too many things on this land. One of them is a guessing game, which is to gather a group of peasant women together, ask them to turn around, cover their upper bodies with a row of wooden boards, and then ask their husbands to guess which one is their daughter-in-law. If the guess is wrong, the man will be whipped, and the woman will be the fun of the day. Others, such as asking serfs to dig out birds' nests, and then a group of nobles will shoot them with guns. If the serfs can dig out the bird's nest before being killed, they will survive. If they can't, they will die. The gypsy and the wild boar are imprisoned together. If the latter can persuade the former not to eat him, it will prove that he is a believer of the devil, and will be burned to death. If he cannot, he will directly become food for the wild boar. Put the serfs into the forest and enjoy hunting. In short, these serfs had no sense of guilt when slaughtering these nobles. The dull farm tools felt very strong when they penetrated the flesh, and they tore the enemy's flesh with hatred. And Brzezinha was not the only team to be destroyed. Bloody massacres continued throughout Galicia. Under the overwhelming hatred of the serfs, the massacre quickly expanded, and they began to target the nobles who had dealings with the Polish Restoration Army. The serfs rushed into the nobles' manor and began to kill, rob, and burn as many as they could, hoping to change their status as serfs. But what they didn't know was that the nobles had already registered the status of the serfs. Even if they turned Galicia into a sea of fire, they still had a final backup in Vienna. But at this time, the final backup was already in Franz's hands. Sitting in the train, he was a little depressed because the engineering team was sent to inspect and repair all the way, but no damage was found. However, in order to prevent the other party from using bomb attacks by luring the enemy in depth, the train still stopped and went. For safety reasons, a large number of cavalry were sent out to conduct carpet searches at intervals, but nothing was found. The soldiers were bored to death. They were here to counter the rebellion, but there was a quiet and peaceful scene everywhere along the way, and Austrian flags were planted on many manor houses. This made the soldiers feel that this place must be particularly loyal. They bet that even Vienna did not have so many flags, and many of them were newly made. In the train, Albrecht was closing his eyes and concentrating. Franz couldn't help but be curious, because the former was the son of Archduke Karol, and his obsessive compulsive disorder was no joke. Before every war, Albrecht would repeatedly deduce all possibilities and try to be as perfect as possible. The same was true for Friedrich. Archduke Karol had produced hundreds of battle plans in Switzerland in the past few years. In fact, Franz also studied with Archduke Karol for a period of time and was evaluated as he will be a competent colonel. This was mainly because Franz's strategy was a bit ahead of his time, and with the communication methods at the time, that kind of macro-management could be applied to the regiment level at most. No matter how large the scale, no one could be found. Uncle Albrecht, why didn't you engage in military chess exercises? Albrecht rolled his eyes at Franz angrily, and then sat up helplessly. We have 300,000 people, and it is unknown whether there are 200,000 people in the entire city of Krakow. What to deduce? I really can't figure out how to lose. What if the other party carries out a beheading operation on us? Albrecht was somewhat dismissive of Franz's statement. Franz, I'm not talking about you. You are too superstitious about your so-called special operations. Let's not talk about whether they can break into this military formation composed of hundreds of thousands of troops. Even if they break in, can they find us? Still a problem. Rather than worrying about this kind of thing, it would be more realistic to consider Prussia's reaction. They have already mobilized in the 3 new provinces. The 3 new provinces refer to the 3 territories of West Prussia, South Prussia, and New Prussia that were carved up from Poland. In fact, Prussia's reaction was normal. After all, the 300,000 strong army was very stressful for Prussia, which had only 200,000 standing troops, and the gathering place was still the 3 new provinces, where they were weak. William IV immediately sent an envoy to Vienna to inquire about sending troops, but Austria's answer was simply counterinsurgency. In a region with a total population of only 200,000, 300,000 people are sent to suppress the rebellion. What a lie. William IV was so angry that he smashed the table, and War Minister Hermann von Point even said that he should take the opportunity to attack Vienna as a preemptive strike like Frederick the Great. But leaving aside the restrictions of the Holy Alliance, just attacking Vienna is very troublesome. Austria and Prussia have different track gauges. If you want to sneak attack by train, you must first capture Saxony. Saxony has never stopped being wary of Prussia, and only 20,000 troops are stationed on the Prussia border. It is unrealistic to make a surprise attack by train, because the Saxon railway station is like a prison surrounded by fortresses. To prevent Prussia from doing this at the same time, Bohemia and Vienna are both densely populated areas, and coupled with the role of railway lines, the Austrians can quickly mobilize hundreds of thousands more troops, as long as they have enough weapons. As for the secret weapon, the technology is not yet mature, and cannot be installed in every army. Insufficient training makes it impossible to guarantee that it will be as effective as it should be. And taking the initiative to attack allies, what kind of thing is this? I'm afraid that it will not be immediately besieged by other powers and the princes in Germany. Even if they want to launch a surprise attack, it is impossible for such large-scale military preparations not to leak some news. At that time, the Austrians may be able to legitimately weaken Prussia, the second brother of the German Confederation. In short, this battle cannot be fought, but William IV does not think that the Austrians really want to fight, but they cannot just sit back and die, so it can only be strategic defense. Franz just found it funny, and felt that the Prussians were more nervous than the Poles, because he learned from the recent intelligence that Landry Prome was actually going to be the king, and he was going to hold a coronation ceremony, and he didn't know if he would have time to visit it. Chapter 736 Some minor problems. What if the Poles blow up your railways after you pass through, cut off your supplies, and then engage in guerrilla warfare behind them? At this time, I remembered a child's voice that was not suitable for the time. Lakshmi Pai obviously had her own opinion. There were military courses in the palace. As a famous uprising leader in Indian history, Franz thought it would be okay for her to learn these. However, the reason why Lakshmi Pai was able to raise this question was because Franz taught him about the power of the railway. At the same time, personal experience also made Lakshmi Pai feel the strong pulse of the industrial age. Although he was not lying on the ground, it also made him deeply understand that the steel monster in front of him was any carriage or cattle on the Indian subcontinent. No car can compare. Franz's sister, little Maria, also wanted to join in the fun, but it is difficult to associate war with beauty. Franz still hoped that his family could stay away from the war, so he did not bring his sister. As for the future that Lakshmi Pai will face in the future, it is far more cruel than war. It would be better if she can recognize the reality as soon as possible. The idea proposed by Lakshmi Pai at this time reminded Franz of the common raid warfare and guerrilla warfare in later generations, but he also wanted to hear how Albrecht, a famous general in the world, responded to this tactic at this time. Although according to the etiquette of the time, women should not interrupt while men are chatting. But first of all, Lakshmi Pai is not Austrian, and secondly, she is just a child. Therefore, Albrecht, who paid great attention to etiquette, didn't mind it very much, and found this issue interesting. After all, academic commanders rarely study such things. It's a very good idea, but on the battlefield, any cunning tricks are just a futile struggle in front of a strong man with absolute power. Besides, if there is a problem with the railway, what do the road protection teams and gendarmerie do? And your targets are just railways and supply teams. You just need to strengthen some protective forces. After completing the main strategic objectives, you can use the army to conduct a dragnet search. Although Galicia is backward, its mainly plain terrain is not conducive to hiding point. Although there are mountains, rivers, and woods, overall they are too scattered and not conducive to hiding point. As long as you don't roll around in the mud like the French did in Spain, it won't be a big problem. Albrecht thought for a while and then said, if you can build a railway in the mud, it is not impossible. After all, times seem to have changed, and the past common sense and the limits of military power are changing. Maybe there will be a weapon in the future that can completely ignore the terrain and pursue pursuits. Albrecht naturally had something to say, but Franz knew very well that this plan was still in the experimental stage. Although the prototype had been built, its performance was far from meeting the military's requirements. Corresponding individual equipment and supporting weapons are still under development, and the stability and actual combat performance of these things remain to be discussed. Albrecht unfolded a giant map with detailed labels on the mountains, rivers, and mountains of Galicia. Lakshmi Pai said with some indignation. According to you, does it mean that, as long as the railway is built to the battlefield, it will be invincible? Albrecht. No, miss. The premise is that when there is an absolute advantage, the railway will consolidate and amplify this advantage. As far as I know, there is no invincible method or person in this world. All we can do is try our best to make the goddess of victory favor us and tilt the scale of victory towards us. Albrecht said that there was generally nothing wrong with it, but he still had a bit of the arrogance of a regular army. Franz indicated that he wanted to add something, and Albrecht nodded. He quite recognized his nephew's level. The basis of guerrilla warfare is the right time, favorable location, and harmony. The so-called favorable weather means that the enemy needs to fight on multiple fronts, and it is difficult to concentrate troops. The favorable geography refers to the so-called mountains, rivers, swamps, lakes, and desert grasslands, and harmony refers to the support of the domestic people and the external support help. The so-called guerrillas usually have insufficient numbers, lack weapons, and have no officers. This may be a bit strange to say. They are flexible in formation, light in equipment, and easy to maneuver. The most important thing for the survival of the guerrillas is intelligence and supplies, and it is the local people who provide these two most critical factors. Lakshmi Pai shouted impatiently, "What are you going to say? Why are you so rude?" Albrecht frowned. Colonel Bordeaux on the side wanted to throw the kid in front of him directly off the train. The actions of the soldiers and waiters around him were stagnant. It was hard for them to imagine that anyone would dare to talk to Franz like this. The atmosphere in the entire carriage became solemn, as if the prince was about to kill someone. The prince refers to Gadareo, the supreme ruler of Zangxi. Lakshmi Pai usually spends time with Franz's sister. When the two little girls are together, others just think they are children. No one except Mrs. Sophie will blame her. The freedom naturally releases her nature. In fact, Lakshmi Pai's estimate was completely wrong. Franz's sister Maria was just crazy in front of her family and was a qualified princess on formal occasions. Franz finally broke the silence. He had to touch Lakshmi Pai's head like an elder, and the latter had to pretend to be well behaved. Patience is also a virtue for nobles. What I want to say is that this is within the Austrian Empire, the province of Galicia, and the survival soil for guerrilla warfare does not exist. In other words, the benefits of guerrilla warfare are negative. In order to maintain this combat mode, the opponent must invest more and more elite troops, as well as more supplies and intelligence personnel. This is almost impossible for the disadvantaged side. Guerrilla warfare is not about how many enemies are destroyed or how many victories are achieved, but about inverting the opponent's benefits and costs. No one would be willing to engage in guerrilla warfare with negative returns. Putting the cart before the horse, unless it can hit the enemy's key targets and attack the enemy to save them. Seeing that Franz had no intention of pursuing the matter, others naturally did not dare to make decisions for him and returned to normal. This time Lakshmi Pai learned her lesson and raised her hand before speaking. Although it is a bit overkill, it is better than lawlessness. Franz suppressed his laughter and nodded, gesturing for her to speak, but the people around him didn't find it funny. They just felt that he was a little too kind to this foreigner, especially Bordeaux and his members of the royal guard. They felt that they should be treated just like the big Indian businessman. It didn't matter whether he was a prince or not, and if he made mistakes, He should be punished. The big businessman pointed out that Veroiza Danny was a partner who had been collaborating with Franz. He could be regarded as a tycoon. However, in Franz's eyes, he was just a piece of equipment that was not easy to use and could only be found temporarily. It's just a tool, that's not a substitute. Chapter 737. It's not that Franz hates smart people, it's just that this business wizard is too smart. Even if Franz wants to help him restore the country, the latter wants to maximize the value of the former Veroiza Danny jumped repeatedly between France and the British in the hope of maximizing profits and becoming the final winner. A king, or a nominal emperor of India, could not satisfy his appetite at all. The British would not allow India to be unified, and Franz would not allow India to be unified. A unified India would be too large to be controlled by one major power. Back to the present. Lakshmi Pay. Since guerrilla warfare cannot win the war, is there any need to persist? Franz took a sip of tea and said, when there is a huge disparity in strength between the enemy and ourselves, guerrilla warfare can at least retain a glimmer of hope for victory. Lakshmi Pay asked again, will we see guerrilla warfare this time? Franz and Albrecht looked at each other. They didn't know, but they hoped to see him. The former wanted to acquire more land. The latter wanted to see the horror of guerrilla warfare described by Franz and test whether he could handle it. However, the main reason why the latter is so confident is that it has sufficient troops and enough room for error at this moment. A scout cavalry came back and said they had encountered a situation. Then they brought a lost fat man. He looked about 40 years old, with fair skin and a delicate mustache. His clothes were stained with dirt and grass clippings, and there were burnt marks on his head. He also muttered something in Polish. Franz couldn't quite understand what it was about, and it seemed to be a local dialect that he spoke too fast. When the detective captain saw the fat man like this, he raised his hand and slapped him twice. Then he shouted sharply, say, what did you encounter? After receiving 2 slaps, the fat man woke up from a dream and knelt on the ground without dignity. My lord, the serfs have rebelled. They kill everyone on sight. My manor, my servants, my family. The fat man burst into tears. People in the carriage had different reactions. Some were gearing up and preparing to show off their skills. Some looked worried because the speed of the uprising in Krakow had exceeded their expectations. Franz didn't care. He knew what was happening. What, may I have your name? Ah, you asking me, sir? The fat man was a little confused, but at this time he had regained some sense, and the young man in front of him knew at a glance that he couldn't afford to offend him. Yes. Franz nodded. Igor Skarowski. Franz glanced admire at Isles, who was standing beside him, and the latter immediately understood and began to look up the information at hand. Mr. Skarowski, are there any other survivors besides you? We will seek justice for you. Really? Sir? Just as Igor Skarowski wanted to grab Franz's hand, he was pushed away by Colonel Bordeaux. Your Excellency is asking you something. Igor Skarowski was a little confused at this time. He saw that the young man had the rank of lieutenant colonel, but the person he called Your Excellency was actually a colonel, and he suddenly felt a little confused. Not mind. However, there are many young generals in the Austrian Empire. They should be the children of a certain big family. It is common for them to find some people to help them in the army. Igor Skarowski didn't think much and then said, also, they are all hiding in the cave of Skokozawa. Franz, okay, you take us to find them, and then I will give you justice. Igor Skarowski, then you need to bring more people. How much? Albrecht stood up and said, with his tall figure, 185 centimeters, 90 kilograms, and strong aura. He was after all a senior officer who led troops all year round. Especially the rank of lieutenant general and the rows of medals on his chest almost frightened Igor Skarowski, a small Polish nobleman, to the ground. There was nothing he could do. After all, it was difficult to meet a colonel at the latter level. With Albrecht as a guarantee. Igor Skarowski felt relieved and took Franz back to the temporary residence of these people. A group of people dressed in very shabby clothes, some of whom were wearing pajamas, were hiding in an abandoned ditch. At this time, Meyeratiles had also found the information about Igor Skarowski, and it was exactly what Franz thought, but she still had to confirm it one last time. People in the temporary camp were very excited when they saw Franz and his party, and they all shouted, "Help, those unscrupulous people are dead. Long live Austria, state your names, Colonel." Bordeaux's words were very cold, so they caused discomfort to some people, and some people immediately became alert. "What are you going to do?" Just as Franz was about to speak, Meyeratiles stepped in first, then lifted up the hem of her skirt and said, "I'm sorry, but it's more appropriate for me to do this kind of thing." The latter's ability is trustworthy to the former's, but this guy Bordeaux always causes some trouble when he's not doing anything. "Everyone, we can only inventory your property if we know your names. Although you have suffered serious losses in the previous rebellion, we can still find ways to deal with things like land, real estate, bills, and bonds." Really, everyone who was still hesitant immediately became enthusiastic and reported their full names one after another, which was surprising. As a clerk, Myratius was able to produce a list of the other party's property on the spot, whether it was land, real estate, bonds, or serfs, almost exactly. These down and out nobles immediately became grateful to Franz and his party, and then Franz confirmed the situation with Myratiles again. "There is only one Mr. Riven who is not on the list. Then get him out. I have told him that there are some unclear aspects in his property registration, and he needs to go to Bochnia headquarters in person to confirm." Franz gave a thumbs up, and now he could carry out the next step of his plan. "Gentlemen, our army will escort you back to your villages to get your property back. Long live." Outside the village of Matako. The Austrian army met a procession of serfs pushing many stinking carts. Igor Skarowski and some local nobles who were far away from the side started yelling. One moment they shouted that they wanted to kill the serfs, and the next moment they cried for their fathers and mothers and wanted to escape. Franz was a little annoyed when he heard this. Bordeaux immediately grabbed Igor Skarowski's collar and punched the latter's throat. Immediately there was only a whine left, and several other chaotic. The guy who yelled was treated the same. The serf team stopped 50 meters away from the army, because the latter had already raised their guns, and the former all lay prone on the ground, only pointing at the contents of the cart from time to time. Franz could smell the stench from afar. This smell was familiar to those who had been on the battlefield. It was the stench of corpses. Looking at the expressions of the surviving nobles, one can tell that these 30 cars are all their fellow nobles. Franz took out a long manuscript. Chapter 738. "What do you want?" Seeing the serfs lying on the ground and the troops surrounding them, the nobles who had been timid before suddenly became full of pride and gestures, as if they wanted to show off with the serfs on the ground. Franz still took one last look at these poor guys with sympathy. With external support, his serfs had to deal with it so miserably, and there was no one left among them. Franz shouted, urging his horse forward, "Stand up, all citizens of Austria." Franz deliberately did not speak German, but spoke twice in Polish and Ruthenian. Because the local population of Galicia is mainly composed of Poles and Ruthenians, but the serfs were still lying on the ground, as if they hadn't heard. This made Franz very strange, so he asked someone to ask. Franz has already violated the rules by coming to the front line, because this kind of behavior is very dangerous and irresponsible. If he really gets off his horse and goes to the crowd to ask questions, then many people around him will be unlucky. Naturally, Colonel Bordeaux had to do this kind of thing, and he was willing to do it. Although his attitude was still bad, he had to admit that his efficiency was high. The results obtained were somewhat surprising. According to Colonel Bordeaux's report, the serfs were reluctant to get up because they saw the double eagle flag of the Habsburg family. Only then did Franz realize how arrogant and ignorant these Galician nobles were. Even the serfs could recognize such a big double eagle flag, but these nobles did not recognize it. In other words, the nobles in these border areas didn't care at all. After all, the last time a member of the royal family visited Galicia was 70 years ago. That is, the famous Joseph II. I'm the eldest son of Archduke Franz Karol of the Habsburg family and Archduchess Sophie of the Württemberg family, grandson of Holy Roman Emperor Franz II, and Archduke Franz Joseph of the Austrian Empire. The recent massacres in Galicia have been identified as a powerful response by the empire to the rebels. And the royal family and government thank you for your bloodshed and sacrifices. Stand up now. Tell me, what do you want? Franz's shout only changed their lying state, and the serfs still looked at each other in shock. Seeing Franz acting like this, how could those nobles not know what he was going to do? Some people were hysterical, but their throats were injured, and they couldn't shout at all. Royal guards do this professionally, but they usually don't show it to outsiders. Some people are almost crazy and want to rush in front of Franz, but this is impossible. Those who run slowly may be caught, and those who run fast will be knocked down by the butt of the gun. If they run faster, they will be greeted by sabers and pistols. Someone knelt down to pray and repent, which also failed to arouse Franz's sympathy. Maybe someone had done the same thing in front of them. If they really let each other go, the serfs should not be so angry at this time. If they have the choice, no one will fight the nobles and landlords with guns with their bodies. Although the performance of firearms in this era was very poor, as a serf with only simple farm tools and sticks, if he wanted to avoid bullets and rush into the dock and then kill the landlord, it was simply not enough to have the courage to die. Even if you are determined to die, you still have to pay a heavy price. Because guns are not just weapons. They also represent rights. Every landowner and noble will recruit a small group of people as their own forces, let them form a guard to protect themselves, and even deliberately create confrontations between serfs. This way the lives of the gentlemen to be stable. Therefore, the success of serf uprisings in this era often required two things at the same time: unparalleled courage, and the local nobles being sufficiently inhumane. Finally, a young man supported an old man and walked out of the crowd. The young man looked very tall, but under the tattered clothes, you could see the outline of the abdominal cavity. The two boots under his feet were obviously different. One of them should be winter. The other one is a common riding boot. Although the old man was being supported by others, he was still in good spirits. His legs and feet were inconvenient, and he most likely suffered gunshot wounds. I am the head of this village. We are not rebelling. We are helping the motherland to suppress the rebellion. At this time, a nobleman cursed hoarsely. Eat everything inside and outside. You are Polish. Poland is your motherland. Immediately, two guards restrained the man and put something similar to a horse bit on his mouth. The man could no longer speak. The old serf didn't care at all. After all, serfs have no nationality. He just continued, "We hope that His Highness the Grand Duke will fulfill the promise of Emperor Joseph II after he ascends the throne." The so-called promise of Joseph II was to liberate the serfs. The old man said it neither condescendingly nor arrogantly, but this sentence was like thunder in everyone's ears. The reason why Joseph II died young was because of his radical political strategies. Moreover, those serfs were the property of the nobles. In Austria of this era, it was not uncommon for nobles to rebel, and usually they would not harm their families. Even if he is caught, at most he will be imprisoned. His family's property will not be lost, and he will not be punished. In many cases, he will not even be punished at all. Once the rebellion succeeds, the benefits will be huge. So who doesn't love this kind of profitable business? The fundamental reason is that the Austrian imperial system is not centralized enough, and it has to maintain a rule that is close to an aristocratic republic. Benevolence largely comes from lack of strength, but Franz really has no way to betray his own class. Franz really wanted to be like other time travelers, who would directly attack the local tyrants to divide their land, and then return to the world with a wave of his hand, and even embark on an unimagined road. However, the reality is that the Habsburg family is the largest landowner in the Austrian Empire, and the emperor himself is a chief noble of the empire. The foundation of the dynasty's rule lies in the support of the nobles and clergy. Moreover, this method of dividing land against local tyrants was used by Huss, the Protestants during the 30 Years' War, and Napoleon also used it during the recent French Revolution. Most of Franz's team were soldiers, so there were many Josephists, and most of them supported the liberation of serfs. It's just that the civil servants and secretaries were a little nervous. They were not necessarily afraid of harming their own interests, but they were afraid that Franz would make the same mistake again. In fact, the serfs didn't really expect Franz to do anything. After all, the nobles made trouble not once or twice. Each time, they raised it high and then put it down gently. The usual practice of the dynasty was to give some rewards to the serfs and then make a lot of empty promises that were simply unattainable. But there was once an emperor who really wanted to liberate them, and the so-called freedom was really only one step away from them. What the serfs wanted most was what they never had, but they had been deceived many times. In order to give the young people some hope, the old man said that he would wait until Archduke Franz came to the throne. Chapter 739. 10,000 years is too long. According to the old man's estimate, Emperor Ferdinand was in his prime and could live for another 20 or 30 years. By then, he himself would have turned into a handful of Lois, and the young people would have become old men and would no longer cause trouble. Without rebellion there would be no war, and the Habsburgs were indeed the most benevolent masters that ever existed on this land. I hope that when I come to the throne you will take part, not as a serf, but as a free man. How beautiful these words are. The Grand Duke can handle things so skillfully at such a young age. He will definitely be a great emperor in the future. Maybe the life of the serfs will be easier by then. It's a pity that he may not be able to see it. The old serf sighed secretly, and the young people beside him were very excited and felt that their descendants should have the opportunity to get rid of their status as serfs. The civil servants who followed Franz breathed a sigh of relief. They were too afraid of the young man's impulsiveness. The soldiers did not respond much. Obedience was their bounden duty, and Franz promised that he would invite some free people to attend the ceremony when he ascended the throne. Now, I declare that all serfs killed in the uprising this time can receive pensions according to the standards of imperial soldiers. This sentence was like a thunderbolt. You must know that the pension of the Austrian Empire at this time was more than twice as high as before. 300 florins may not be a large number for the residents of Vienna, but for the serfs, it is the income of 6 years of strong labor. Franz's statement made the serfs excited, because with this money they could redeem themselves. There must be people here who have questions. That is, can't these serfs even save 6 years' wages? The answer is that I really can't save. Not only can I not save any money, I have to borrow money from the landlord from time to time just to survive. Serfdom could last for thousands of years, so there was naturally a way to control the advancement of serfs. Otherwise who would do the work? This is tantamount to liberating the serfs in disguise, but no one would dare to raise objections if they pay the money and deliver the goods. However, more than 3,000 nobles died this time, and at least tens of thousands of serfs died, which required a pension of tens of millions of florins. Such a huge amount was difficult to collect at one time, and it was not known whether the serfs would accept the expected money. While the entourage and serfs were thinking wildly, Franz dropped another even more bombshell news. The Austrian Empire will deprive all traitors of their property. These words were like a bolt from the blue to everyone present, even Albrecht, an apolitical royal family. It was common in the East to confiscate the homes of traitors and exterminate them, but this was not the case in the Austrian Empire in the 19th century. Treason by nobles was usually not punished by death, but by exile. The family would most likely only be humiliated, not it will be dusty. There is a death penalty for nobles, but it is very rare. Even in 1848 in history, most of the rebel nobles were lynched by the people instead of being sanctioned by the law by the imperial government. The number of people sentenced was very small, but those who died were sanctioned by the empire. There are even fewer nobles in a rebellion of this scale in Hungary in 1848. Less than 100 people were ultimately executed, including very few nobles afterwards. Franz could not confiscate the property of these people for treason, but had to confiscate the property of foreign hostile forces. At the same time, Galician serfs and local officials needed to conspire. Myratiles lamented that Archduke Franz still took that step. Her thoughts can represent the thoughts of most people in the entourage at this time point. Because Franz's behavior was a bit too radical, the news might explode if it got back to Vienna. But in fact, he has more radical measures. Franz then gave a speech. The general content of the speech is as follows. He affirmed the achievements of the Galicians, and at the same time, denounced the inhumane behavior of the local nobles. Then we put forward some hopes for the future, and finally conduct a commendation meeting, and a criticism meeting point, in order to promote something new. Criticizing old things is the most effective way. But Franz will not let it be expanded. Therefore, the criticism conference only criticized the evil rebellious nobles, not the aristocratic system itself. Polish nobles have always been very good at not being nice to others, otherwise they would not be beaten like this by their own serfs. This kind of criticism meeting was very effective, and even other ethnic groups in Franz's team wanted to punch him in the face. The hands of Miss Meyer, who was responsible for recording, and other clerks were trembling, because once these contents were published, they would cause an uproar. The content cannot be described as appalling, it is simply shocking, and some of the behaviors are beyond the imagination and understanding of ordinary people. But the serfs became more and more enthusiastic in their talk, and there was a lot of embarrassment in it. But the soldiers and Franz's accompanying officials did not know that they had no doubt about what these poor people were crying about. There is no more profound education than the rage of the serfs, the cries of the rebellious nobles in the fire. The vast majority of people's views on good and evil are fixed at this moment. This is actually the education of remembering hardships and thinking about sweetness for future generations. This is not only for the people at the bottom, but also for people around Franz to strengthen their beliefs, whether to serve the country as an individual or to be punished as a beast slaughter. As for the dross of serfdom, Franz did not want to keep it. He directly burned the serf contracts of the nobles who participated in the rebellion in Vienna, the so-called final backup. Together with the bodies of those nobles, the flames shot into the sky. At this time, the rebellious nobles finally panicked. They no longer took pride in being the Polish Restoration Army. Instead, they began to say that they were Austrians and loyal servants of the Habsburg family. Some people even took out a flag of the Principality of Austria, but they had an indescribable strange feeling. The executioners hesitated when they saw the flag, because they did not dare to burn it. Franz, Mr. Igor Skorowski, right, yes, I have always been a loyal supporter of the Austrian Empire. You see, I still carry the flag with me. In fact, the flag of the Austrian Empire is black and gold, and the red, white, and red flag in his hand is the flag of the Principality of Austria. Naturally, Franz would not believe this nonsense. Can you show me your flag, Igor? Skorowski hurriedly handed it to Colonel Bordeaux, who then handed it to Franz. There was just a click, and the flag was torn apart. The Austrian Principality flag instantly turned into the Polish flag, white and red, and the strange feeling disappeared. This, Igor Skorowski was a little at a loss. Franz laughed at this time. It seems that you not only betrayed the Austrian Empire, but also the Polish Federation or the Kingdom of Poland. In surprise, Igor Skorowski was pushed into the pit of fire by Colonel Bordeaux. This noisy guy is finally finished. I didn't write down the specific content of the speech, so as not to be criticized for the word count all day long. In addition, I want to say that, whether the speech is false or empty, or true, but, and beautiful, it requires energy and brain power. Chapter 740 Alternatives. The so-called commendation meeting afterwards was naturally to praise those who performed outstandingly in countering the rebellion, and their award was noble status. In fact, the Austrian Empire was a very strange country. This country had been working hard to increase the number of nobles, and even regularly granted noble status to Jews who converted to Catholicism. At this time, you only need to pay 1,000 florins to the house of nobility in Vienna to become a noble. However, this noble status does not bring any benefits. You only need to pay 3,000 florins to become a titled noble. The so-called title aristocrats have the right to add an additional affix to their postcards or epitaphs. such as oak sword or something. Noble titles are usually impossible to buy with money, but as long as you can afford it, someone will help you find a way. In fact, many orthodox dynasties, including the United Kingdom, have been trying their best to expand the ranks of the nobility since the 16th century. However, Spain is the only one with such a weird thing as the Austrian Empire. There is nothing we can do about this. Who can let us go out of the same school? The reason why Franz used his noble status to commend him was self-evident. The old nobles were finished, but their ecological niche needed someone to fill it. Therefore, these new nobles have become the best substitutes. They are relatively more loyal and easier to control because they have a shallow foundation and no backing. Another advantage of this prize is that it does not cost money. Franz took a directory of nobles from the House of Lords, just like picking something out of a bag. Moreover, increasing the number of nobles is beneficial to the country and the family. After all, those nobles are associated with the dynasty. Whether they are willing to admit it or not, they must have an emperor. For Franz, he is one step closer to his goal. Serfdom is an institution that will be eliminated, but the nobility and privileged classes will not disappear. According to this basic logic, Franz's actions are easy to understand. However, he did not want to fragment the land too much like the French, because that would only make short-term profits and gain a reputation as a good person. In fact, this is the agricultural and land problem that has plagued France for hundreds of years. It is difficult to improve the utilization efficiency of land that is too fragmented. Gizzard also noticed this. During his administration, he even openly supported land annexation, saying that there are fewer farms in France than before. But this does not mean that French agricultural production has decreased, because large farms are more productive. However, French farmers did not understand this. They felt that Gizzard was a sinister man who supported the annexation of their land, and even the natural and man-made disasters in recent years were blamed on him. Moreover, the way some farmers annex land is also disgraceful, and some even resort to all possible means. Otherwise, it would be difficult to acquire the land that farmers regard as their lifeblood. During this period, the French government and officials even seemed to be aiding the evildoers. Although Gizzard had been driven to New Louisiana, Texas, this policy was retained. However, these notoriety still hangs on him. After all, Marshal Soult does not want to wade into this muddy water at all, and others are not willing to bear this responsibility. So everyone tacitly placed the blame on Gizzard. Back in Galicia, Franz would not break up the confiscated Polish restorationist lands into small plots and sell them to peasants. But not all of the previously liberated Galician serfs, because not all nobles participated in the rebellion, and it was impossible for Franz to cleanse all those nobles indiscriminately on unfounded charges. However, these farmers who used to live as serfs had nothing to do except farm. The main reason is that these people do not want to leave their land, and the factories and mines are now filled with Jews, and the docks are dominated by Italians. After all, the main commercial ports of the Austrian Empire at this time are in northern Italy. Trieste is traditionally considered a military port, but due to the increasingly prominent problem of insufficient throughput in the port of Venice, Trieste's commercial status is also rising. Franz's plan was to combine the manorial economy with the commune system that had appeared in history, in which farmers divided the land rental scope into families and village communities at the same time. The manor owner takes the lead in purchasing agricultural machinery, fertilizers, and improved seeds, and the amount is divided according to the land area. In fact, it is controlled by the government and aristocrats, which can reduce the blindness of farmers to a certain extent and effectively avoid the situation of getting what you sow. After all, the government and aristocrats have wider sources of information and better understanding of the market. Moreover, the larger the farm, the lower the relative cost, which helps increase production, improve efficiency, increase income, and make people feel happy. As for the trivial matters and intrigues that occurred in the specific manner, it should be left to the local nobles and the church to resolve the conflicts. In short, Franz's request to the manor managers is, don't be confused about big things, and don't worry about small things. In fact, this is another restriction on the power of managers. Otherwise there will be many local emperors who abuse their power. Don't underestimate some small things. Although some things may seem insignificant to outsiders, they cannot be relieved from the perspective of the person involved. If the depression in the chest accumulates for a long time, problems will inevitably arise. This is what the so-called ordinary people are like. It is better to let the local government digest it, by letting officials restrict it with administrative orders of course. If the matter reaches a point where the law or force must be used to resolve it, then the managers of the manor should step forward. After all, only certain groups of people can use these two weapons. In fact, the lands of the Polish nobles were very small in Franz's eyes, and did not meet Franz's setting of large farms and large estates. Only by combining the lands of a large number of nobles could Franz's demands for future agriculture be met. However, those nobles who were dead, or had clear evidence of having an affair with the Polish Restoration Army, were easier to deal with. But more nobles did not participate in the rebellion, and Franz could not use force, so the second phase of the plan was born. The reason why Franz started such a big battle, as soon as he came into contact, and held both a criticism meeting and a commendation meeting, his purpose was to show it to others. The first is to express one's determination, and warn the Polish Zionists to restrain themselves, otherwise it is best to consider clearly what the consequences will be. Secondly, these serve as a model. People in these villages can be rewarded and gain the status of free people, and other serfs in Galicia will also have this opportunity. Although it is a bit of a loss, swimming against the current will lead to retreat. The Polish restorers cannot always be so stupid. Instead of waiting for the opponent to learn and then use this trick to counter the Austrian Empire, it is better for Franz to strike first now. And compared to the freedom of having nothing, Franz at least gave the serfs hope and visible benefits. Finally, among the nobles who did not participate in the rebellion, some of their lands were also included in Franz's plan, so he hoped to obtain those lands at a lower price. Chapter 741 Atrocities. In fact, Franz also gave these people other options. They could choose to take money to continue their aristocratic career in the city, or go to the colonies to continue being their landowners. Although the landed aristocracy has lagged behind the times, it is just right to place them in the colonies. Not only will they not hinder the development of society, but on the contrary, they can consolidate Austria's local rule. However, Franz still hopes that they can choose the first path. After all, the development of cities and industry requires a large amount of capital, and the financial and industrial aristocracy are much easier to control than the land aristocracy. Although Franz was busy, he did not quell the rebellion. Since it was impossible to determine whether the railway was damaged, he asked people to repair it all the way along the railway, while he led the people along the way to justice. Word of Franz's atrocities against the Polish nobility soon reached Vienna. However, this did not cause much repercussions, mainly because the Austrian nobles did not regard the Polish nobles as compatriots. Even nobles have a chain of contempt, and those at the bottom of the Austrian Empire are this group of Polish nobles. There is no special reason. It is because they arrived later. Although northern Italy joined the Austrian Empire later, it cannot stand up to the close blood relationship between the two sides. Even the Habsburg family that currently rules Austria comes from Italy. Leopold II was the Grand Duke of Tuscany before inheriting the throne of Joseph II, and the old Emperor Franz II felt that he was an Italian until his death. The Polish nobles are relatively mixed, because in the past Galicia was the poorest place in Poland, and the nobles living here were naturally not very noble. However, these guys have the unique arrogance of the Poles, which makes it difficult for them to integrate into the new circle. At this time, these guys were in trouble. Not only did they not cause grief in the aristocratic circle, but they also gave everyone a sense of pleasure. Franz confiscated the land and made it state-owned, and did not distribute it to the poor. This also made many nobles feel relieved. They are not afraid of a greedy emperor, but they are afraid of an emperor who sits crookedly. At the same time, due to collusion with Mrs. Sophie, the royal family will provide a large number of positions to the aristocracy. This can solve the troubles of some noble families to a large extent. After all, there is only so much property, and decent jobs are hard to find. Many people who enter churches and monasteries do not have the determination point, although many films and literary works in later generations have portrayed the priests as a group of idiots who are greedy, lazy, and without moral integrity point. But in reality the clergy had to go through training and examinations, which would be a very dull and tedious time, and it would be almost impossible for a true idiot to pass these selections. Secondly, wherever there are people, there are rivers and lakes, and the water is often particularly deep in places where people play with people's hearts and human nature. Point thirdly, even if you want to be lazy and have no morals, you still need a group of believers to support you to be lazy and have no morals. Priests at the bottom and in remote areas may live similar lives to those of dervishes. Priests in Dalmatia experienced riots because of their treatment. Point there is no other way. Even if you have faith, you still have to feed people, right? Dalmatia in this era was horribly desolate, with sparsely populated people, barren land, unintelligent people, and barbaric cruelty without realizing it. Points due to poor infrastructure and low productivity. Even if the locals have money, they cannot spend it effectively. Points due to various reasons. Unless the family connections are in place or the money is in place, few of the noble children are willing to take up the dead-end job of being a priest. Point working as an errand on the royal territory is completely different. At the very least, it is a decent job. Even if you are managing some former serfs and bad land, serving the royal family is already a great honor. Even the most powerful noble would not dare to laugh at this honor, unless he is not Austrian or really has no brains. Franz only gave these noble children a chance, provided them with a platform, and gave them a chance to show themselves, but he did not fully count on this group of people. Point Franz would hire a professional team to coordinate and plan the construction of the manor territory, and these noble officials were nothing more than low-level executors. Of course, if they are really talented, they will definitely show it. Or if they are not talented, but they can do things in full accordance with the rules and procedures and the code of conduct of the nobles, Franz is also willing to use them. Point as for those scum, those who want to eat nothing can go home, and those who want to harvest Franz's wool, Austria has a lot of colonies where they can pay off their debts. Those who have ambitions to swallow the sky, or are dissatisfied with the current status of the empire, go to the mental hospital and fire pits awaited them. Point inside Krakow. Point Landry Prome wanted to be emperor, but bad news came one after another. Although he was mentally prepared, it came too quickly. Point first of all, the Poznan uprising and Warsaw uprising failed. Since the organization had been destroyed before, the hasty uprising was directly suppressed by the Prussians and Russians. In fact, due to poor intelligence work, every move of the Polish nationalist army was under the surveillance of the Poznan and Warsaw governments. Therefore, it is not surprising that the two uprisings were stillborn, but the subsequent Lviv uprising was even more outrageous before the rebels arrived at the designated location. A large number of local serfs were waiting for them, and a real-life battle royale began. Point facing the overwhelming encirclement and suppression by the serf army, the rebels finally had to seek shelter from the Lviv police station. Point director Sammer, who didn't know why, thought he had made a great contribution, but was scolded by Governor Stadion. Why don't you and your men close the door and let them fight a little longer? The latter is a civilized person who has always kept his emotions and anger secret, but now his saliva splashed all over the former's face. Point in fact, Count Tardian has long disliked these Polish nobles. He hopes that these people will make the matter bigger, so that he can send troops to deal with them. Point at the same time, he was one of the few people who saw Franz's intentions, so he secretly cooperated from the beginning, and even sent his cronies everywhere to fan the flames. Director Sammer, who was sprayed with saliva, naturally knew the seriousness of the matter. Being able to serve under such a smart person, he naturally knew that the time had come for him to take the blame. Point the next day, a group of serfs were imprisoned for making trouble. That night, screams could be heard, and group fights broke out among the prisoners, causing a large number of casualties. Director Sammer was dismissed, but due to the special period, he still took over his post temporarily to see the consequences. As for those prisoners who participated in fights in the prison, they were driven back home. After all, Lviv prison does not support idlers. At the same time, Count Stadion was not idle. While collecting a large amount of criminal evidence, he asked the survivors to testify against the villains. The purpose was naturally to confirm the guilt of those people. However, this group of people usually did too many bad things, and this investigation involved a lot of old accounts. Both Franz and Count Stadion felt that it was good, at least it proved that they did not kill the wrong person. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 740 Time to wake up from the dream. Secondly, in addition to the destruction of the three branches, the situation in Krakow is not optimistic. The newly formed Krakow City Defense Army and the Polish Kingdom Guards were attacked outside the city and suffered heavy losses. Originally, Landry Prome's Polish nationalist army was torn apart due to his own unscrupulous operation. In fact, the original goal of this uprising was to establish a republic, and it was a republic between merchants and nobles, not a republic between nobles and kings, let alone a kingdom. But Landry Prome had his own plans. The so-called uprising was just a performance, performed for those gentlemen who wanted to see it, to prove the value of the Polish nationalist army. 1 City versus 3 kingdoms. Don't be ridiculous, only a fool would believe this. If you can become a king, your future life in exile will be completely different. And becoming a king is equivalent to having a talisman. After all, according to tradition, the king cannot be executed. In history, Napoleon turned the whole of Europe upside down, and the final outcome of his 2 defeats was nothing more than exile. However, Landry Prome's approach was not understood by many Polish reunifiers, because it ran counter to their ideals, so division and internal strife were inevitable. The newly formed Krakow City Defense Force and the Royal Guards of the Kingdom of Poland are just some fledglings who have never been on the battlefield, or a group of capitulationists and coerced people attracted from inside and outside the city. They can surrender to Poland, can also surrender to Austria. Theoretically, Landry Prome had 50,000 troops in his hands, but in fact, these people could not even deal with the serfs outside the city. In just a few days, the number of troops dropped from 50,000 to 30,000. Obviously this could not have been killed by serfs. After all, even if there were 20,000 pigs, they would not be able to eat them all in the past few days. But the biggest blow to Landry Prome was the priest Peter Szegedy, who was supposed to crown him. He was hung on a tree when he incited the serfs to rebel, and has now dried into a sunny doll. The Polish Peasants' Union was the organization that suffered the most heavy losses in this uprising. Their top leaders were almost slaughtered, and even their so-called foundations were almost uprooted. Because it turned out that the serfs and peasants did not listen to them at all, and the so-called influence did not exist at all. They could only drive believers with the help of the church and the emperor. So, when these people tried to make revolution, the people at the bottom sent them to the guillotine first. Some serfs even thought that the priests were bewitched by the devil. The simple country people decided to use their own methods to save these poor people, such as feeding them cow dung and gold juice until they were full, or letting the flames purify everything. In short, there were all kinds of treatment methods, and the organization was declared dead. Landry Prome's dream was shattered, and he could only find an acolyte and appoint him as the Archbishop of Krakow. Then in the historic Wall Cathedral, a simple coronation ceremony was held without even a procession. At this time, the top leaders of the Polish restorationists in Krakow were a little confused as to what the new king wanted to do. There were many kings who temporarily ascended the throne when the troops were approaching, but most of them were to boost morale. But Landry Prome didn't even hold a parade. So what's the point of him being crowned? Although Russia and Prussia are still in a wait-and-see mode and have no intention of sending troops to Krakow to quell the chaos, the Austrian Empire's troops are already on the waypoint. Even if there is no large army coming from Austria, the garrison in Galicia alone is enough to feed the newly born Kingdom of Poland at this time. At this time in Krakow, there is uneasiness, hesitation, fear, confusion, and ambition. Everyone is doing things according to their own wishes, and even the atrocities that occur every moment are considered necessary evils. The entire new Kingdom of Poland is facing the risk of destruction at any time. Austrian newspapers have even reached Krakow. However, the only general of the Zionist army who can fight, Bem, is still locked in the dungeon. This is not to say that Poland has no military talents. On the contrary, there are countless Polish restorationists who came from Prussia, but most of them have the wrong composition. These people did not join the Polish Restoration Army. Moreover, these people are relatively young, and there are even many German and Polish mixed race people. They are still ambitious and can't stand the warlord style of their predecessors. Rather than fighting for power and profit in the city, they want to make achievements on the battlefield. In addition, there is another problem. The European continent has been at peace for a long time. The several wars that have occurred were large in scale, but they were short in duration and low in intensity. As a result, middle and low level officers were almost like soldiers on the battlefield. They were either routing or escaping. This led to the fact that none of these officers obeyed the other at this time. The top leaders of the new Kingdom of Poland did not know how to fight, but even some of the manpower gave power to the cadets, who came out of the Prussian military academy. Against all opinions, the latter's qualifications are also insufficient, and he cannot convince the public. It is simply wishful thinking to make the army act like an arm. At this critical moment, Landry Prom disappeared out of thin air. The leaderless Poles could only relieve their worries through meetings, but some things became more and more urgent. For example, the number of Austrian Imperial troops far exceeded their expectations, and they were approaching them step by step. The most desperate information is that the team sent out to bomb the railway was attacked by serfs on the way, so far the railways between Krakow and the Austrian Empire are open. However, the Austrian army was still moving very slowly because they did not know that the team sent by the Poles to destroy the railway failed. After all, France had already received the news that the Poles had sent people to destroy the railway. Due to the rush, the letter was not detailed. He couldn't even tell whether the Poles wanted to blow up the railway or create something centered on the railway. For fear of an ambush or for safety reasons, Franz would first send troops to clear the site at each stop and would refuse all invitations from local nobles and businessmen to stay in the heavily protected train carriage. People will be sent to carefully search the railways on the road, including both sides of the railways, although Franz was not idle and even led people to carry out the Austrian version of fighting the local tyrants and dividing the fields in a safe area. There would be something wrong if the march could be fast. The so-called Austrian version of attacking local tyrants and dividing their land has been mentioned before, but it is more appropriate to describe it as looting or forcibly nationalizing land. But now that the Poles know it, Franz will soon know it too. He was not in a hurry at all. He wished that the fire would burn as brightly as possible, as long as possible. But at this time, Britain and France could no longer sit still. The French wanted to recruit a volunteer army to support Poland. Night charity balls in Paris were held one after another. It is said that the kind-hearted people of the British Empire shed tears every day, and even the indigenous people under its rule wished they could go to the European continent to support the Poles. Chapter 743 Kidnapped. Although Prussia had a share in the partition of Poland, the two allies of the Holy Alliance, the center of the rebellion was obviously not on their own territory, so they were happy to watch the show. And compared to the Poles, Prussia felt that Austria was their biggest enemy. After all, a small Krakow really cannot afford an army of 300,000. As for the Russians, it will take some time for the intelligence to reach St. Petersburg. The new Polish Governor General Wimborowski was already fascinated by Warsaw because it was a city with great heritage. Moreover, the biggest problem in Russian Poland at this time was not the Austrians or the Austrians, but cholera. Since the flow of refugees to Austria was stopped, a large number of wanderers wandered in Russian Poland. These people are the greatest source of trouble. Even if they are killed, their bodies will become petri dishes for plague. At the same time, as more and more people became targets for deportation, Russian Poland experienced a rare labor shortage. Moreover, with the closure of the Russian-Austrian border and the spread of the cholera epidemic, tax revenue in Russian Poland has plummeted, and businessmen are afraid to set foot here. This has a lot to do with the actual local situation and the reputation of the Russians. As for the Polish democratic system, everyone knows that absolute democracy means that no one can make the decision. This may be the reason why everyone is unhappy when Landry Rome becomes emperor, but no one opposes it. But at this time, no one was involved in the theoretical talk, so the meeting naturally turned into a joke. Everyone had their own ideas, and no one was convinced by anyone. In the end, it turned into a random chat. 4 carriages loaded with goods passed by quietly on an unnoticed country road. In the refugee camps in the middle reaches of the Dniester River, the Poles were even more defeated. The king was obviously not as big as the emperor and God. The refugees are very clear about this, and they themselves are either serfs or a low-class wandering race. They really have no love for Poland as a country at all. Coupled with the role and visible benefits of the church and preachers, the riddled theory of the Polish restorationists appears even more feeble. You must know that these preaching masters selected by the church and the preachers trained by Franz travel around the country on weekdays and face people ranging from big nobles and big businessmen to beggars and prostitutes. They have more masters than the people they have spoken to, and they are extremely experienced in fighting. These nails that the Polish Zionist army drove into the Austrian refugee camps were either pulled out by the refugees, left on their own, or were taken away by the secret police of the Austrian Empire after losing their value, and were either executed, reformed, or used as guinea pigs. The brother and sister Ruib and Ace also arrived in Galicia. The once dirty lame boy had now put on a clean white robe. As the master of preaching and the senior preacher of the empire, he sat confidently in the carriage. The little girl on the side who used to work as a hunting dog and compete with dogs for food was now wearing a large nun's uniform, with her legs crossed casually. However, whenever the carriage bumped, metal would inadvertently come out of her body. Scratching sound. Ruby, do you need to carry so many weapons every day, Ace? Asked his sister worriedly. He was still very confident in the security of the Austrian Empire. After all, the church and government would send people to protect such capable and important people. Ruby put her hands behind her head impatiently and said with a hint of resentment, yesterday, the day before yesterday, and just now, if it weren't for me, you would have been dead. There were collaborators from the Polish Nationalist Army in the management of the refugee camp, and those guys came in with guns. Do you know how dangerous the situation was at that time? Ace wanted to touch his sister's head, but as soon as he stretched out his hand, he was grabbed by the latter, and then a hidden sword was pressed against the former's neck. Ruby raised her hand to retract her hidden blade, then raised her chin. People's hearts are evil. Brother Ace, then. She received a violent shudder on the head. Whoever is your brother, call him brother, 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 good brother. Haha. Ruib rushed towards Ace like a baby, and the latter said with a doting look on his face, why don't you always grow up? Hey, you'd better stop doing that kind of thing. Ribbit stood up suddenly and said dissatisfiedly, how can that be done? We cannot live up to the expectations of the bishop and the empire. Do you remember the 10 commandments? Of course, I know it by heart. God said, thou shalt not kill. So why are you still stubborn? Isn't it a good idea to go to a monastery to worship scriptures? No. If everyone hides and doesn't care about the world, what will happen to the world? When we were in Silesia, we didn't dare to slack off for a moment every year, and we didn't do any bad things, but dogs eat meat, livestock eat grain, and we only have potatoes. Potato. Or potatoes. Ah, no, if we are lucky, we will still have wild vegetables and mice to eat. What did our family do wrong? My mother starved to death, and my father died of illness. We just went to the public forest to pick up some useless sticks that no one wanted and use them as firewood, but we were driven away by dogs, stripped naked and whipped. It's not us who's wrong. Ace sighed. God will punish them. Ruby asked with a sneer. 10 years or 100 years? The former looked into the latter's eyes and said, you can't go to heaven with hatred. You should learn to forgive. I'm only responsible for sending them to see God. It is God's business to forgive them. May God bless you, my sister, and may he bless you, my brother. The preaching was still very successful. The young priest gained a large number of believers, but in an unknown corner, a young girl was cutting off the enemy's fingers with a guillotine until the other party gave her the answer she wanted. The serfs' carnival has spread to the vicinity of Krakow. Although some people are eager to try this city, there is still a big gap between the ancient city that has stood for thousands of years and the landlord's fortress. It is almost impossible to conquer it with cold weapons of point. However, this did not prevent the gentlemen in Krakow from getting nervous and using their brains. After some bargaining, General Bem and his officers were finally released. In fact, in addition to facing the restless serfs, they also have to face the Austrian army that will arrive in the near future. The armies of Franz and Stadion have merged, but the former is not ready to end it too soon. He plans to be invited by the Jassiski family to visit Dorobich. As for the errand of siege of the city, it was naturally left to Count Stadion, but there was no need to besiege Sank. Just camp 5 kilometers away from the city. For a vanguard force of nearly 100,000 people, just setting up camp was troublesome, and the daily consumption of supplies was huge. Fortunately, it had the support of railway lines and canals. Franz only brought 5,000 people with him on this trip, but it was still enough to crush the Jassiski family's guards. Of course, the former is not here for fun, and the latter does not want to treat guests. A hangman banquet is about to come. Actually, this is not a break from the chapter, but a preview of the next episode. Chapter 744 Kishanpingyu. Dorobich, the territory of the Jassiski family. The sky was wrapped in thick dark clouds, with only a faint ray of light barely breaking through the clouds. There was a dullness between heaven and earth, which gave people an inexplicable feeling of desolation. Vilyu Jassiski was wrapping his injured left hand. He never expected that the slave his family had raised for decades would actually attack him. Vilyu Jassiski is 46 years old. He doesn't know the name of the serf who is responsible for slaughtering animals in the kitchen, but that guy is always there. What? An ignorant white-eyed wolf. Vilyu Jassiski couldn't help but spat. Fortunately, the other party was old and frail, and the boning knife only pierced his palm. Damn. Ham people, even letting them live in the manor will not change their despicable blood. At this time, a well-dressed young man wearing gold-rimmed glasses walked in. Sir, everyone has gathered. There are still 120 hams in the manor. They did not directly participate in the previous rebellion, but, Vilyu Jassiski said expressionlessly, bury them all. Yes, I'll do it right away. The young man's tone did not fluctuate at all, as if he was talking about an insignificant matter, and as if he already knew the answer. Soon there were screams of terror from the backyard, a mix of the old man's plea, the cry of the child, the scream of the woman, and the angry curse of the man. These honest serfs don't know why the noble master is doing this to them. They obviously haven't done anything. They are so obedient, and they just want to live. Then a burst of noisy gunfire rang out, startling the crows around, and interrupting people's thinking. Kulba fell to the ground. The sky was still so blue. He still remembered that when he was a child, he was called by his master to go to the river. There was a wooden sign by the river showing his white thighs. Kulba was asked to identify which one was his mother. He made the mistake and his father was drowned in the Dniester River. Kulba's mother was recognized as a beauty in the village, so she was often called to the manor by noble gentlemen. However, because of this relationship, Kulba later became an honorable vegetable washer. He diligently washed every vegetable leaf and every fruit cleanly. The old man often praised him for his hard work when he was still alive, but the new man grew up eating clean fruits and vegetables, so he reduced his wages by 2/3 as soon as he took over the manor. But Kulba still worked hard. After all, except for him, others not only did not receive wages, but were even whipped. Kulba also fell in love with a dishwasher who liked to laugh very much. They always washed things together, ate the leftovers of the old men, caught mice, and used blades of grass as harmonicas. Later, I heard that the girl was spotted by the master's friend. Kulba was not jealous, but sincerely blessed her. But what Kulba saw the next day was a girl with bruises all over her body and dull eyes, and her plump breasts were heavily wrapped. Later, I heard from the old steward that the new master's friend was a Czech shepherd. What we are talking about here is not the modern Czech wolf dog and dark wolf dog, but the appearance is somewhat similar to the modern German shepherd dog. A few years ago, the new master became obsessed with slave fights to the death. This is not allowed by law, but the governor also likes it. Before the new governor took office, Kulba personally killed his brother, his best friend, and his best friend's brother a few days ago. The old guys in the kitchen said they wanted to kill the master, Culber was scared and wanted to escape, but he was locked in the witched point. Now that everything is over, Culber finally left the witched, but what greeted him was not endless work, but a bullet point. My vision gradually became clearer, the world became quieter, and my body became very light point. But before Culber had time to enjoy it, he was hit hard in the face with a hammer. Then blood splattered everywhere like a broken watermelon. Red and yellow juice splashed everywhere, and the air was filled with blood breath. Point killing to establish prestige is not the purpose, but establishing prestige as is usually polite. Butler swung a sledgehammer and smashed the faces of the undead one by one like a walnut. Point it's just that with his two-handed hammer, he only started to breathe heavily. After swinging it a few times, then he adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses with a handful of blood, and then gave instructions. The rest were buried. The team leader on the side quickly took out a white handkerchief, but the young butler just wiped a few hands on the other person's face and left. Point the squad leader put away his handkerchief and shouted to his men, "Move quickly. Did you see it? This is the consequences of betraying the family. If you want to be like these ham people, you can try it." The men remained silent, ignoring the cries and curses of those people, and pushed the remaining men, women, old and children into the large hole they had dug before, filling it with soil one shovel after another. It only took half an hour to complete this hole. The big hole is filled. Point the people in the pit already understood their fate, but they did not dare to resist at all, because those who tried to resist before, or might have resisted, had already fallen under the gun of the other party. Point when people are in desperate situations, they often like to ask gods and worship Buddha, pray to heaven, and make wishes to gods. This is just a kind of psychological comfort and a way to try to escape reality. Point suddenly a scream came from outside, and then the ground began to tremble slightly. Is it an earthquake? But is the tremor too mild? Even Vilyasinski, who had been sitting empty in the room before, walked out of the room. He looked at what was happening in front of him in disbelief. Point first, a slowly approaching black line appeared on the distant hills, and then, as if the scroll of a painting was being pulled away, a black curtain swept in, sending up smoke and dust all over the sky. Point but that's not a curtain, but an endless expanse of cavalry. A real cavalry. The thunderous sound of horse hooves makes people lose the ability to think. Point with an A. The tall horse stood up in front of the manor. Let the Yasuski family speak out. The visitor was a colonel, and this young butler who looked like a gentleman would definitely ask a question. "You're a little colonel. Who gave you the courage?" But the man who was dubbed a gentle beast trembled with his legs like a frightened sheep. Point the captain of the Yasuski family guard, who was known as the last warrior of Poland and commanded 400 warriors, was not much better either. Thousands of horses are galloping. Its momentum is vast. The mountains are flat. Point they had read such records in books, but it was a different feeling when tens of thousands of horses actually appeared in front of them. Point in fact, there were not tens of thousands of people, only about 3,000 people, but there were more than 5,000 horses. However, due to the loose formation and the raised dust, it gave people a feeling of boundlessness. They had seen scenes of thousands of people before, but thousands of fully armed cavalry and thousands of civilians in tattered clothes and cowering bodies gave people a completely different feeling. Point moreover, these more than 3,000 people can be regarded as the most elite cavalry in the entire Austrian Empire. Let the Yasuski family speak out. The leading officer shouted again, and the horse seemed to feel the owner's impatience and was digging hard at the soil with its hooves. Chapter 745. This place is broken. Normally, the butler should be the one to contact the visiting guests at this time, but the man wearing gold-rimmed glasses had already panicked and ran frantically towards Vilyasinski's room. Sir, there are some officers. There are guests coming." The young butler tried hard to control his tongue, but it was like it was tied into 10,000 knots and he couldn't straighten it out. Vilyasinski was not so panicked. After all, he had been to Vienna and seen the military parade. In the previous crisis in Luxembourg, when Austria defeated France, Austria held a celebration, and the victorious soldiers naturally participated. Point as a local nobleman, Vilyasinski was also qualified to be invited to Vienna to visit the review ceremony. Point this has always been Austria's practice, and has continued since the Holy Roman Empire, because it can show national strength. Point this is very important for a powerful family. or a powerful country. Not only can it enhance the confidence of its own people, but it can also directly deter enemy countries and potential enemies, and can also slightly promote economic development. In fact, France's beer fully occupied the German market through victory in the two wars against France. Wilau Jasowski's new butler is a top student at the University of Krakow. He is knowledgeable, rational, tall, handsome, young, and loves Poland, but he doesn't like to call himself master. Although the butler finally changed his tune at this time, Wilau Jasowski was not happy at all, because this proved that the young man he had always valued was useless at the critical moment. There's nothing to panic about. Let me see him, master. Wilau Jasowski personally greeted him, which still caused an exclamation of exclamation. After all, the master was very noble, and even when the general arrived, he did not go out to greet him. It's just that at this time and that time, the Jasowski family and the former governor worked together in the past, and they were able to control the Galicia region. But now the new governor, Count Stadion, is a man of no means. He is not short of money or women, and he has no interest in art. He just wants to drive the Galician nobles to death. At this time, there was an uprising in Krakow, and the Polish nationalist army threw the entire Polish region into chaos. The nobles of Galicia rebelled against Austria, and the serfs rebelled against the nobles. If the Jasowski family had not had a strong armed force, those mud-legged people would have been beaten into the Wubeo by now. The most important thing is that, although this guest is a colonel, Wilau Jasowski has never heard of a colonel who can lead thousands of cavalry. Usually there are only about 1,000 people in a regiment, and the British cavalry regiment only has 450 people. Even the large Russian and Austrian regiments have about 1,500 people. The momentum of the cavalry just now was obviously not what 1 or 2,000 people could achieve, so at this time Wilau Jasowski was very puzzled. He didn't understand why such a large number of cavalry came to his manor. Although Galicia was in chaos at this time, I had only heard of serfs attacking Wubeo and looting it. So far, I had not heard of any troops participating. What's more, such a large cavalry team can completely plunder towns, so why bother staring at this piece of fly meat? They can't take away the land, so why don't they rely on war horses to snatch wheat? Hello, Mr. Colonel. I'm Wilau Jasowski, the patriarch of the Jasowski family. Wilau Jasowski tried his best to behave calmly, neither humble nor arrogant, because no matter what emotion he showed, the other party would find flaws and cause unnecessary trouble. I, Bordeaux of Hastel, faithful servant of the Habsburg family, Chamberlain of Archduke Franz Joseph, will now conduct a security inspection of your estate. Wilau Jasowski was a little confused now. Why did the royal family suddenly come to his manor? But he immediately thought of it, because according to etiquette, every family would send invitations to the visiting royal family. But usually such invitations are not responded to, and everything is just a courtesy process. However, this kind of invitation is not completely unresponsive. If a member of the royal family comes to visit, it is a great honor for the local nobles, and this relationship will bring many benefits to that family in the future. In short, the royal family's acceptance of invitations from local nobles is almost like a lottery, but this grand prize comes at a bad time. The manor had been attacked several times before, and pits were being dug to bury people inside. When the royal guards entered, he was afraid that he would be killed on the spot. Because this is most likely to be misunderstood as some kind of pagan sacrificial ritual, and it is also aimed at members of the royal family. Offending the imperial power and the divine power at once would be like the end of a noble family. Even if the other party didn't understand it that way, it was illegal to torture and kill serfs privately. And on such a large scale, plus Count Stadion who didn't recognize his relatives, Wilau Jasowski would have to be sentenced to exile at the very least. Colonel Bordeaux did not dismount, but said with that stinking face, "Can you open the door? Archduke Franz is coming, we have to hurry." Upon hearing this, Wilau Jasowski immediately broke out in sweat, and a very ugly smile appeared on his tense face. "Sir, why don't you have a drink first? This kind of inappropriate nonsense will naturally arouse people's vigilance, let alone someone like Colonel Bordeaux who has been responsible for the security of important people for a long time." Bordeaux snapped, "Open the door, sir. I want to give Archduke Franz a surprise." Wilau Yasuski is still explaining, but this obviously doesn't work for Bordeaux. Count Yasuski, please get out of the way. Groan. Ups, value. Yasuski was about to step forward to say something, but Bordeaux winked, and the two knights immediately dismounted and pulled the former aside. No one among the servants and guards of the Yasuski family dared to make any move. They all lowered their heads for fear of making eye contact. Bordeaux and his men pushed the door open, but the servants and escorts of the Yasuski family still showed no reaction. They stood there as dumb as logs. On the other hand, Franz's team was still marching slowly on the road. The rural roads in Galicia were muddy, winding and long. Fortunately, hollow rubber tires and new shock absorbers had been replaced by this time, but Franz was still very uncomfortable sitting in the carriage. Lakshmi Pai on the side was very happy. This was the best car she had ever ridden in. Exquisite, chic, comfortable, everything made her like it, and the little girl couldn't help but get excited. But the scenery outside the window made Lakshmi Pai unhappy. The houses on both sides of the road looked dilapidated, and the combination of thatch and soil was hard to like. Especially the walls of different colors and the uneven roof make people feel a little disgusted. The different colors of the mud walls are usually due to repairs, and the unevenness of the thatched roof is usually due to age. Lakshmi Pai couldn't help but sigh. It turns out your country also has such a shabby place. Chapter 746 Chat. After hearing Lakshmi Pai's words, Franz subconsciously wanted to refute. But the further he walked, the more ruined walls and overgrown grass appeared. There was only silence and desolation along the way, which made Franz feel unusual. Dorobici is considered a prosperous place in the whole of Galicia, and the Yasuski family has hundreds of years of inheritance. Theoretically speaking, hundreds of years of business should not be such a virtue. And those weeds rule out the possibility of being destroyed by this rebellion. After all, such tall weeds cannot grow in a short time. Franz could only sigh helplessly. It shouldn't be like this here. This really shouldn't be like this. I came here when I was a kid, and it was full of farmland. Mr. Yasuski was very kind. Ma Attiles talks about her childhood memories. Have you been here? Franz was very curious about the new clerk, Miss Attius, who was working part-time as an accountant. You must know that old Attius was just a second-rate Jewish banker in the past. This family's business should be mainly in Vienna and Italy, and I have not heard that they have any relationship with the Poles at this sensitive time. Franz had to be careful. After all, there were many things that capsized in the gutter in history. Although a detailed investigation was conducted before Miss Ma was hired, it seemed that there were still flaws. Yes, I came here with my father when I was little. Ma Attius was not an idiot, so she explained in detail. It was because of business matters at that time. It was very common for the farms of great nobles to occasionally have cash flow problems. Franz nodded and did not continue to ask. Because agriculture in this era was inherently very unstable, and natural disasters and man-made disasters could affect harvests, it was almost routine for nobles to borrow money from bankers for turnover. In fact, there are not many normal loans, most of which are loan sharks. Even for normal loans, the interest rate is so high that 10% can be called a conscientious businessman, so bankers are often resented. As for the possibility that Miss Maya has any contact with the Poles, it is very unlikely, because her Jewish identity is difficult to be recognized by the latter, and if she really had that idea, she would not expose herself so foolishly. More importantly, only Albrecht knew about Franz going to Dorobici. Everyone thought that there was only one target. Krakow. Lakshmi Pai rolled her eyes, subconsciously feeling a little unhappy, because she was not the center of attention. So he repeated it again. This place is really shabby, indeed, but there is a lot of potential here, and it could become a city in the future. Franz knew very well that after all, this was the only oil field in Central Europe. In addition to coal, iron ore, and fertile black soil, he could not find a reason why this place did not rise in the industrial era. Historically, the Austrian Empire had always had a grudge against the development of Galicia due to a series of complex reasons such as geopolitics, history, and ethnicity, as well as the threat of the Russians. However, Franz knew very well that only a strong country and economic prosperity would be most conducive to national stability. Only national stability can better promote development, and at the same time, promote national identity and national integration. National stability is both an end and a means. Historically, Austria only regarded it as the so-called ultimate goal, and the result was that it developed its own land like a thief. Naturally, it would be difficult to win the trust of the people by doing this. After all, even the top leaders of the empire themselves did not believe it. Facts have proved that this road will not work, and Franz will definitely not choose to make the same mistake again. Therefore, the future Austrian Empire will not quietly carry out construction, and then be happy to make a small fortune secretly. Referring to Galician oil, Franz will do it with great fanfare, and with great fanfare, so that people can see the gaps and benefits more clearly. But Lakshmi Pai naturally didn't know this. She only saw a desolate scene everywhere. In fact, the reason why Lakshmi Pai felt that this place is too shabby was mainly because the two cities where she stayed in Austria for the longest time were Venice and Vienna. An ancient capital with convenient water and land transportation and a history of more than 2000 years. It was also the economic, cultural and political center of Austria at this time. The other is the largest trading port in the empire. In addition, due to the development of railways, Lakshmi Pai could only see the scenery along the railway lines, such as the Alps, Semmering Railway, etc., which are important tourist attractions even today. What she had seen before was either prosperous or picturesque, which was in sharp contrast to the desolate grass and ruins at this time. But Franz dismissed what he said about the great potential here and that it would become a city in the future. Because in the eyes of Lakshmi Pai, this is just a tough talk and sophistry. Children naturally like to test other people's boundaries. There is also a saying that heroes have emerged from youth since ancient times. How big is the potential? How far is the future? Naturally, Franz wouldn't tolerate this kind of face-hopping behavior, so he caught the arrogant little monkey. "We are civilized people, don't be rude," Lakshmi shouted, but this kind of moral kidnapping was of no use to Franz. Their moral standards were fundamentally different. The latter gave the former a hard slap on the forehead and then returned to normal. "It won't be long, 10 years, maybe 20 years, Lakshmi muttered softly while holding her red forehead. "I thought you were so powerful. It takes so long to build a city." Franz looked at the former again, who suddenly shrank his neck and ran away angrily. In fact, children can instinctively observe people's emotions, and she could see that Mauritius on the side had no resistance to Franz. If Franz really wanted to continue beating her, she was afraid that Miss Maya would not only not protect her, but also help her. So Lakshmi Pai hid in a corner. Franz sighed. It's not that simple to build a city. The arrangement of roads, transportation, hospitals, schools, churches, police stations, fire stations, water plants, and various infrastructure and pipelines all requires planning. What is the most important purpose of city building? Business, industry, agriculture, politics, military. You have to choose one. To continue to develop, cities need pillar industries. Franz said a lot to himself, but these were a bit too advanced for Lakshmi Pai and even Mauritius. They didn't think so much, and could only be stupid. Listening. Note, Mauritius is not yet 20 years old. Being able to understand one or two subjects is already considered very good. In the 19th century, compared to modern times, access to information was very limited. After a bumpy journey, Franz finally arrived at the manor of Ilyusovsky. How would you describe your first impression? Luxurious, but not gorgeous. In short, this kind of taste Franz really cannot praise. Chapter 747. Doors inlaid with gold and silver are not uncommon, but the door in front of you looks too thin, and the color of the gold and silver paint is wrong. It feels like a layer of gold powder has been painted on the wooden door. To put it simply, it's the feeling of wanting to show off despite not being strong enough. The guy standing at the door dressed like an ancient Turk is probably Ilyusovsky. Franz really didn't like the attire of this kind of grassland aristocrat. A Central Asian style robe band and nondescript felt hat made him look bloated and fat. The reason why his felt hat is neither fish nor fowl is that it is too tall for a hat. But what is even stranger is that it is not in the shape of a towering cylinder like the popular bearskin hats in Western Europe, but only the front. It stood out. What's even more frightening is that there is a bifurcation in the middle of this protruding part, which makes the whole hat look like a pair of rabbit ears on the head. The so-called bearskin hat is the kind worn by the modern British Royal Guards, but this kind of hat was first popular among the French army. In fact, normally, this kind of traditional Polish clothing would also come with a machete to show off force. But it was all confiscated by Colonel Bordeaux. After all, Polish nobles did not enjoy the same rights as Magyar nobles, but the latter's traditional costumes were slightly more gorgeous than the former's. The people following the Polish nobleman were also very nondescript. The man behind him, who looked like a butler, was obviously dressed in British style, with a top hat, tie, and tailcoat, but missing a cane. What Franz didn't know was that because there were metal objects on his cane, it was also temporarily confiscated by Colonel Bordeaux. The remaining servants and guards all had their eyes flickering, filled with fear, anxiety, and a little helplessness. It goes without saying that something is going on here. But this is just right. If nothing happens, then Franz's visit will be in vain. He showed a smile and stepped out of the carriage, but there was a hint of coolness in the wind that blew through everyone. Due to the hasty preparation, the entire welcome ceremony seemed long and boring. Lakshmi Pai wanted to cheer up several times, but she held back. Myratius was okay. She had seen so many scenes like this that she became numb. In the end, Franz felt it was too embarrassing and ended the farce. Afterwards, Wieniawski led Franz to visit the entire manor. There were indeed many styles of buildings, but they were just like building blocks that were put together haphazardly with no order or beauty. Wieniawski basically thought that he would never be humble to anyone in his life, but in front of Franz, he would always lower his head unconsciously. This made the former feel a bit ashamed that he had never felt before in his life, but the latter didn't feel anything at all. In Franz's eyes, the great financial backer of the Polish Restoration Army was not very strong, and his ability was even worse. He owned more than 100,000 acres of land and was still in such a miserable state. However, this cannot be fully believed because it is very likely that he is lying to avoid taxes. However, based on the intelligence collected previously, what he said is probably true. According to intelligence, the Jassowski family has been in decline. In fact, not only the Jassowski family, but also the entire Galician aristocracy are in decline. Because after Count Stadion took office, he began to attack the power of the traditional nobles. His idea was to weaken the big nobles, support businessmen, and win over the small nobles. But the reality is that the power of railways and technology far exceeds Count Stadion's imagination. A steady stream of foreign goods is destroying the local primitive manor economy. Businessmen, with the help of the government, have easily taken over the dominance of the economy. The big aristocrats were able to maintain themselves despite their deep foundations, but the small aristocrats were directly defeated, and many even went bankrupt and became a new labor force in the city. Aristocrats here mainly refer to landowners. Archduke Franz, it is rare that you are honored to come to my humble residence. I would like to give you a horse as a gift. Valiu. Jassowski spoke with excitement and had a vulgar face, which made it difficult for people to like him. But Franz must be a good horse, otherwise the former would not give it to the latter as a gift. It's just that Franz really doesn't have much interest in horses. Although there are stables in Schönbrunn Palace, he rarely rides them. Franz has seen many famous horses, and he prefers watching horses eat than riding horses. In fact, Franz often fed the horses in the palace some strange things, such as cream and coffee. Franz couldn't stand Vienna's diabetic diet in any way, so he would give it to passing animals that had too much sugar that he felt they couldn't digest. But the reality is that animals like sugar and dairy products very much, whether it is horses, seals, or flightless auks. They all flock to them. Back to business. Thank you for your kindness, but how can I let you part with me? Franz decided to decline politely. After all, he was here to mess with him. If he accepted the other party's gift and the other party really didn't do anything too extreme, how should he deal with it then? After all, Wieniawski was a nobleman with a title, so he couldn't just charge him with it. Although Polish nobles have their own circles, they rarely interact with nobles from other regions. However, nobles in other areas will inevitably lose their reputation. Doing so will inevitably lead to a small loss. The royal family itself is the spokesperson of the aristocratic class, and it is not a wise move to destroy its foundation. Archduke Franz, don't refuse in a hurry. There is a racer course in front of you. You might as well take a look before talking. Franz glanced at Colonel Bordeaux, who first shook his head and then responded with an affirmative look. It doesn't look dangerous, but there should be something that Colonel Bordeaux doesn't like. Franz nodded in response, and Villiers immediately trotted excitedly to lead the way. The latter felt that such a gift would definitely satisfy the former. After all, who has never been young? The autumn sunshine shines on the horse farm, making it look warm and soft. The grass underfoot has gradually turned yellow, with a hint of golden autumn laziness as a whistle sounded. Then the sound of horse hooves came from the distance, and then a tall and elegant white horse came into view. This horse is extremely fast, full of power, tall and elegant, and its coat is as bright as silk. In addition, it is as pure white as snow, without a trace of color. It is like a natural protagonist, letting the grass, flowers, and even it is the sky and the earth that have become supporting roles. But today's protagonist is obviously not the horse, but its rider, a beauty wearing a dark red windbreaker, black tight breeches, and riding boots of the same color grabbed all the attention. Simple color matching, but without losing the sense of luxury. The beauty's long golden hair is swaying in the air, just like a fairy coming to the dust. At the same time, her bright eyes are full of determination and confidence, which will remind people of all the beautiful qualities and give men a desire to conquer. A Janny? Franz couldn't help but said with some doubts. Chapter 748. Embarrassing. Of course this is impossible, because the chest is too flat. Also, the hair color is wrong and the height is different. Even if the opponent is on a horse, it can be seen that he is of unusual stature. After all, the tall horse in front of him does not make him too short. The details that Franz was stunned for were immediately seen by Villiers, who was standing aside. The latter felt that the matter was done, but the former felt a little embarrassed. The female rider and the white horse galloped towards Franz with no intention of slowing down. Although both Franz and Villiers understood what this meant, the guards on the side did not know. There was a wooden fence separating Franz and the female rider, but when the distance between the two sides was about 50 meters, a row of lever-action rifles was set up. The female rider obviously did not expect this situation. After all, she was a pampered young lady on weekdays. However, in front of Franz's guards, the guy in front of him was definitely a dangerous person. Approaching a member of the royal family without permission, riding a tall horse, and galloping towards them, even if they are not carrying weapons, as long as they bump into the Grand Duke head on, a tragedy will occur. To put it bluntly, it would be a serious crime to scare the Grand Duke at such a close distance. However, beautiful women always gain more understanding from people, and people are more willing to associate them with beautiful things. However, as the royal guards and Franz's private soldiers, royal dragoons, their first duty is to protect Franz, which will not only affect themselves, but even have a great impact on their own family. So Miss Celestina's first appearance became a farce. Suddenly seeing dozens of guns pointed at herself, her heart was completely occupied by fear. Fortunately, before she could take any action, her mount sensed the danger first, and with a sudden stop, the owner on the horse was thrown away. Although he said a lot, everything happened within a few seconds. Franz had no time to stop him, nor did he have time to push aside the layers of guards in front of him to save people. Under the influence of inertia, the beautiful blonde beauty drew a beautiful parabola and fell directly into a puddle, splashing a piece of mud. Fortunately, the mud and water greatly cushioned the impact of landing, otherwise it would have been possible to break bones and tendons, become paralyzed, or even directly break the neck bones. But there is also a disadvantage, that is, the little fairy turns into a little mud monkey. The mud all over her body and face makes her look like an old witch in a fairy tale who chooses people to eat. Franz couldn't help but want to laugh, while Villiers on the side hurriedly climbed over the fence with his fat belly and ran towards the clay figure. It can be seen that Villiers still cares about the clay figurine, but Franz is very curious. The latter has investigated Jana's background. There should be no intersection between the two, and the victim has been fished out of Siberia by Mrs. Sophia's agreed. At this time, the little clay figurine ran away crying. Villiers did not chase him, but walked up to Franz angrily. Grand Duke, I'm so sorry. The lack of prior communication caused you to be shocked, Colonel. Bordeaux standing aside could almost kill the opponent with his eyes. After all, this could be regarded as a security incident. If Franz used this reason to make the other party lose everything, it might be an exaggeration, but taking away half of the other party's territory should not be a problem. However, this is still far from his strategic goal. In fact, it is just a piece of land in Dorabich, and it is not enough to mobilize such troops. Therefore, Franz would naturally forgive Villiers for this small mistake. At the subsequent banquet, the former even informed the latter of the detailed deployment of the Austrian side. Even Russia and Prussia were sitting on the sidelines watching the fight between tigers, and Britain and France were constantly putting pressure on public opinion, and they all told the other side, most of which was confidential information. However, the more he knew, the more aberrant Villiers became. Because he felt that it was absolutely impossible for the Polish Restoration Army to win this war, and Krakow would inevitably turn into a sea of flames. Of course, in order to pretend to be more like him, Franz also asked Villiers to let him get to know the little mud monkey. Oh, no, she is a beautiful girl. The latter is naturally very willing, and the girl is naturally already prepared. The girl in front of her has blonde hair, blue eyes, fair skin, beautiful appearance, and elegant figure. In terms of temperament, she is quite good despite the scene where she fell into the mud before. Generally speaking, it meets people's standards for judging beauties, but it doesn't have much appeal to Franz. First of all, he has seen too many, whether they are celebrities from the upper class of this era, or PS beauties in later generations, or AI paintings. The most important thing is that I have lived with the Plus version for more than 10 years. At this time, I really have no interest in seeing this youth version. Archduke Franz, please allow me to introduce you. This is my adopted daughter, Celestina. Celestina. Polish comes from heaven. Villiers looked a little proud, as if a painter was displaying his most precious work. Franz had to cooperate with a satisfied smile and nodded, and Villiers turned to Celestina again. Celestina, this is Archduke Franz Joseph. Nice to meet you. Although Celestina smiled and extended her hand, there was a trace of disgust in her eyes. To be honest, Franz didn't like this kind of hand kiss at all, not to mention that the other party didn't want it either. I'm so sorry, Miss Celestina. I ate some greasy food earlier. I can't use a lady's glove as a napkin, can I? Franz took off his hat as a response, and both parties breathed a sigh of relief. Afterwards, Bordeaux suddenly handed Franz a napkin, and the latter was so angry that he secretly gave Franz an elbow. It was hard to imagine that a person could be so stupid. Franz could still say some polite words in social situations. After all, he had learned them in etiquette classes. However, because Franz's words and actions were too formal, it made Villiers and Celestina somewhat unable to keep up. At this time, Franz finally understood why his friends always said the term country aristocrats. The Yasuski family was also considered a famous family in Galicia, but if they were expected to use the etiquette of Vienna's upper class, then the results would be definitely a failure. The reason why Franz didn't behave strangely was because his later education did not pay special attention to these so-called etiquette. Mr. Yasuski, what do you think of the Zionists in Poland? Franz dropped a bombshell, not only because of the turmoil in Galicia at this time, but also because Villiers was one of the funders of the Polish Restoration Army, and he should even participate uprising in Lviv. It's just that Villiers was not a fool when he saw that the uprising team was killed by the serfs before they even entered the gate of Lvov. He immediately fled back to his manor. Because of his great fame, Yasuski's manor was also attacked by serfs, but well-trained guards and a strong fort protected him. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 749 Take a Gamble. However, it was difficult to guard against domestic thieves day and night. Several slave workers who had worked for Yasuski for decades attacked Viliu, causing his left hand to be injured. Now Franz brought 5,000 people to the Yasuski manor. If he said that he had no idea about the Yasuski family's territory and property, Viliu Yasuski didn't believe it at all. Thinking of this, his hands couldn't help but tremble, and the tableau almost fell to the ground. This Viliu Yasuski glanced at Colonel Bordeaux subconsciously, swallowed his saliva, and said when he found that the other person was staring at him, "I think they are a group of hopeless traitors who have completely let down the kindness of the Habsburg family. I'm willing to contribute 200,000 florins to help the empire put down the rebellion. Will you?" Yasuski scolded the Polish Restoration Army and the rebellious nobles with his impassioned speech, and repeatedly drew a clear line between himself and them. Finally, he took out a military resource. Preparation shows determination. Franz didn't know how many times he had heard these words along the way. Of course, some people had true thoughts, while others were trying to draw a line between them. But Viliu Yasuski was different. A carrier pigeon fluttered its wings and left the Yasuski manor at night, and Krakow received a letter with almost the same content 3 days ago. The letter contains detailed movements, personnel, and weapons configuration of the Austrian army, and even logistics information. Bem, who had just been released, was so surprised that he could hardly open his mouth from ear to ear when he saw this information, because hundreds of siege guns could completely level the entire city of Krakow. The long-barreled 16-pound cannons of the Polish Restoration Army could not solve any problem at all. Coupled with the number of nearly 300,000 troops, Bem had no chance of winning. The Polish Nationalist Army mobilized several times in Krakow, but there were more deserters than recruited recruits. If this rate of development continues, the Polish army will be gone in less than 2 months without the Austrian army taking action. However, Viliu Yasuski's letter still brought a glimmer of hope, which was definitely good news for Krakow, Poland's last hope. The Crown Prince of the Austrian Empire, Grand Justice Franz Joseph, was a guest at Yasuski's manor. The distance between the two places could theoretically be reached within 10 days by a rapid march. Franz's identity as Crown Prince was announced on his birthday. This was considered a birthday gift from the family to Franz. No one in the family objected to this matter, and Queen Anna's influence was negligible at this time. Ferdinand I was very willing to leave the palace and go to the countryside to retire, because in the Hofburg Palace he was the emperor in name no matter what, and he had to listen to the ministers arguing with each other, whether he wanted to or not. He also has to agree to a lot of things that he has no idea or understanding of. Being a puppet is boring, especially without personal freedom. Archduke Franz Karol was forced by Mrs. Sophie to sign the abdication agreement. Although he was somewhat reluctant, no one wanted him to succeed, let alone anyone to help him, because the entire Austrian Empire was calling a king who made a difference. At this time, the international status of the Austrian Empire was very high, but most people felt that it could be higher. Officials, nobles, and the army all felt that the country was very strong at this time, and it was time to make contributions. Nationalists are looking forward to the clarion call for reunification. Although there are gaps between various ethnic groups, the overall trend remains unchanged. The church was one of Franz's bases. Archbishop Prussia spared no effort in touting it, which raised the public's expectations. The advantages that this will provide Franz with very broad support. The disadvantage is that once it fails or makes people feel that it is not worthy of the name, there will be a huge psychological gap, thus intensifying social conflicts. Franz brought 5,000 cavalry to Yasuski's manor, but due to the large number of people, he had to withdraw 2,000 people. So at this time, he was only protected by 3,000 cavalry. Tisovsky and Dembowski had a bold idea. Tisovsky and Dembowski were the actual people in power in Krakow at this time. Because Landry Promy disappeared mysteriously, he could only be temporarily replaced by others. Tisovsky and Dembowski were chosen by everyone. Their abilities are unknown, but at least they were able to reunite the scattered restorers. Tisovsky, General Bem, can you lead an army to capture Franz Joseph alive? Dembowski, even if you die, it will also dampen the morale of the Austrians. At least everyone's blood will not be shed in vain. We can tell the world that Poland exists. Tisovsky wanted to capture Franz and negotiate terms, while Dembowski wanted to fight to the death. However, Bem was in a dilemma because the two places were too far apart and there were too many variables in 10 days. This kind of military adventure was almost impossible to succeed. Bem sighed. Two secretaries of state. I don't think this plan is actually feasible. This is so hurtful. After all, everyone released Bem in the hope that he would bring miracles. In the past few days, Bem has almost denied the feasibility of all plans of the Polish restorers. In fact, this is also a kind of helplessness, because it is difficult for a clever woman to make a meal without rice. At this time, Krakow is not enough to compete with the Austrian Empire in terms of military strength, weapons, and materials. Tisovsky was a little angry. General Bem, can you defeat the Austrians? I cannot. Then, can you defend Krakow? I'm not sure either. Then, what are you thinking about? We are desperate now and there is still hope. The other party only has 3,000 people, and we have 30,000. Yes. Yes. Fight. Yes. I can't defend it anyway, so why not give it a try? Tisovsky's words immediately aroused a response. To be honest, the feeling of waiting to die is the most uncomfortable. Nestled in the city of Krakow, he may be crushed by the arriving Austrian army at any time, but he is powerless. At this time, they finally found an outlet, and this only hope immediately aroused everyone's remaining bloody spirit. Bem never looks at people's faces, he only talks about what he knows. The troops around Franz Joseph must be the elite of the Austrian army, and combat strength cannot be judged by pure numbers. Tisovsky, do you think we Poles are inferior to the Germans? How can we lose, even if we fight 1 out of 10? Yes. Mr. Tisovsky is right. We are fighting the elite. What? Elites? The cavalry is strong in mobility. Do the Austrians still dare to use 1/10 of their troops to fight a counterattack? Even if the cavalry dismounts, it is worse than the infantry. Besides, Viliushevsky is a patriot. As long as he cooperates with us inside and outside, we will definitely be able to kill all the Austrians. Then we will use that bullshit archduke as a bargaining chip. Right. Send troops. Send troops. Send troops. The crowd's voices soon overpowered the voice of General Bem, who wanted to say, it will be good if half of the troops are left when we reach Dorobiki. Chapter 750. The gangster eats the gangster. Anyone with some military knowledge would not try to rely on militiamen to attack targets hundreds of kilometers away. In fact, this kind of dementia-like resolution is impossible to pass under normal circumstances. But who said that this is an extraordinary period? Landry Prome may not be a good person, but there is no problem with his ability. It is indeed not easy to bring such a loose organization to where it is today. At least he is much stronger than the people in front of him who only rely on the strength of their numbers to force Bem to send troops. But this does not mean that Landry Prome is really smart. In Pest at night, street lights are not yet common, which saved the life of the man in the trench coat. Magyar riders carried torches and hounds, searching for traces of prey in the city. Little did they know that the cunning prey had jumped into the waterway in the city, while the Magyar nobles on the other side of the city were still cleaning up their trophies. There were 4 carts full of gold, silver, currency and jewelry. No wonder 4 tall draft horses were used to transport them. This amount of money can almost be worth an entire year's tax in Hungary. For ordinary nobles, it is a wealth that is impossible to possess in a lifetime. Some people in the room were staring at the gold in front of them with greed, while others were staring at their companions with ferocious looks. In their eyes a burst of gunfire rang out, followed by the sound of swords piercing flesh and miserable howls that didn't sound like human voices. In the end, only one person came out. As soon as the door closed, his body slid to the ground against the door. The tense nerves and intense exercise made his throat feel thirsty, and his throat kept mumbling. The man put his hand into his coat pocket and fumbled around, and after a while he took out a pocket watch. With a clear click sound, the pocket watch was opened, but inside was not a photo of a young girl, but a middle-aged man with a beard. The man's breathing gradually became calmer and his voice became clearer. Mr. Kossuth, Hungary will be independent. 3 hours later, The hunters had concluded that the person they were looking for had left the city, but it didn't matter. The money was already in their hands, and no one could escape from the territory surrounding them. The blockade of waterways is much easier than that of land. After all, there are only 2 docks in the whole city, and there are many more land passages in the dead of night. Landry Prome had thrown away the water-soaked windbreaker and randomly stole a sheet to wrap it around him. He never expected that the Magyars would actually attack the enemy. They should obviously be strategically allies, but they would attack him, the leader of the Polish uprising, which was simply unreasonable. Landry Prome's heart ached when he thought of those carts of gold, silver and jewelry. There was nothing to feel sorry for those foolish and loyal men. After all, they would have to be dealt with sooner or later. Landry Prome was walking and found a fire. His body was soaked in water for several hours and he naturally approached the fire. The homeless man surrounding the fire said nothing, but moved aside to make room. A group of homeless people came together naturally. Do you want to have a family, Dorobich? Yasaski Manor. Franz seemed a little bored because there were really few entertainment programs in the country manor. Although there were singing and dancing programs every day, they were extremely crude. It would be okay if he just traveled through time, but Franz has been in this world for more than 10 years, and there is no feeling of novelty at all. Vilju Yasaski did have some novel ways of playing, but he really didn't dare to show them in front of Franz. After all, the former never understood the latter's thoughts. Vilju Yasaski really couldn't do such a thing by taking the initiative to provide evidence. And he felt that he still had a secret. As long as the main force of the Polish Restoration Army could come, the Yasaski family would be the #1 contributor to Poland's restoration. Franz brought only cavalry, no artillery or heavy weapons. Krakow's previous reply stated that 100,000 troops were already rushing to Dorobich, and Vilju Yasaski really couldn't think of the possibility of losing. So he tried his best every day to keep Franz and his people. No matter how high the price was, it was worth it. But those programs were really lackluster. The scariest thing is that Franz has to pretend to be happy every day. After all, it would be bad if the other party finds out. Playboys come to the countryside to experience life. In addition to singing and dancing every day, they chase chickens and dogs with shotguns. Although Franz was not very happy, his entourage was having a great time. Even Myratiles, who usually seems steady, has begun to learn to hunt Count Yasaski's chickens with a gun. To be honest, everyone in the Royal Dragoons was a playboy before, but now they have unleashed their instincts and hunted all the hunting grounds of the Yasaski family. Later, they could only hunt livestock. When the livestock were gone, they could only hunt poultry. But the real catastrophe for the Yasaski family was the thousands of war horses. In addition to eating fine feed, these war horses also needed to add rapeseed oil to wheat and beans, and a little salt as an adjustment. This kind of catering, coupled with the huge amount of food, is simply unaffordable for ordinary farmers, who even eat better than those noble cavalry. Fortunately it was autumn, otherwise these thousands of tall horses would have eaten Yasaski alive. Bordeaux was still the same, patrolling Franz's surroundings like a machine every day. Apart from being larger than ordinary Polish noble manors and having stronger defenses, there seems to be nothing special about the Yasaski manor. But if I must say it, Franz felt that the number of servants here was seriously insufficient. Of course, this is also related to too many visitors. After all, who would receive thousands of visitors at once? As for Miss Celestina, although she has a good face, she is really not good at seducing men. His excited heart, trembling hands, somewhat reluctant eyes, and an expression ready to sacrifice generously at any time, almost engraved the words "I'm a novice" on his face. Fortunately, Franz is pretty good at practicing this kind of thing. The two parties have maintained a relationship that is neither awkward nor awkward, but the biggest problem for Franz is the aftermath. This Miss Celestina was also obviously a member of the Polish Zionist army, and if not, then certainly a Zionist. But she can't be blamed. After all, her adoptive father is Vilju Yasaski, a major financial backer of the Polish Restoration Army. It's hard not to be affected by his preconceptions, and after these days of investigation, it is basically certain that Celestina is a Janis daughter. With this kind of relationship, it will be even more troublesome to deal with. As for how Celestina became the adopted daughter of Ilyushaski, one can only ask a Janna's unreliable friend. According to Ilyushaski, he picked up Celestina at the door of the church. Such vulgar plots in novels are unlikely in reality. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.